Corey Hughes, Blood History. Thanks for being with me.
Hey, I appreciate it.
Corey, what was the moment when you said to yourself back in July of 2018, maybe, or before that, where you said, I'm doing this and I'm not going to look back?
Well, Kennedy's always been on my mind, like going back to the film, right? When I was like 15 or whatever I was when that film came out. You know, that changed the world. That film changed the world. And honestly, it was a propaganda film and everything that it resulted from it was a backfiring. And ultimately, I had gotten into history around 2015, casually studying history. I spent a couple of years on the Holocaust and World War II, and that led me basically to the doorsteps of Kennedy. And I have an associate, Ryan Dawson, who had been a Kennedy guy for many years, but he doesn't talk about Kennedy a lot. And so we were having a conversation one night, and I'm like, bro, just tell me who was on the knoll. And he's like, well, you want me to tell you or you want me to give you a hint? I was like, ooh, this sounds like fun. Just give me a hint. And he gave me a couple hints. And that right there changed my life. Because just from going from wanting to know who was on the knoll, that connected to everything else and introduced me to this world of covert operations. And it just sucked me in. It sucked me in. And I spent the first 3 years literally putting in like 12-hour days. Like it was like I had to. I remember falling asleep with my laptop like on my chest and like waking up in the morning and just like going right back to it. Like not even getting up to go to the bathroom or breakfast. It was like I've never understood obsession like that until I really started to get into it. And what really made me reach that level of obsession was I started to see things and make some conclusions that nobody else had ever made. And I'm like, nah, there's no way that other people haven't realized this. Particularly the David Ferry stuff. David Ferry was in Dallas. I mean, it's the most obvious thing in the world. And once I realized that he was in Dallas and realized that no one in the world had ever put him in Dallas, I'm like, there's a lot of meat on this bone. I'm like, I don't care if it's been 60 years. These people have been swirling the pot forever. Nothing has been done. No shooters have been identified. And I realized that it was probably my background in police work that gave me a different eye for this thing. Because I was a cop for about 8.5 years. I was a crime scene investigator. I understand, I'm an expert at all things law enforcement, and I really understand investigations and the nuances and ins and outs of investigations. And I realized that a lot of people will have the evidence right in front of them. I'll see posts on X where it's like they got an answer to something, and then they'll be like, I wonder what's going on here, right? People are afraid to pull the trigger. And I kind of got that back to like, people don't really understand how to judge and weigh evidence. How do you know whether to accept someone's witness statement or to disregard it? These are things that you learn when you work the road for a long time. And the average investigator doesn't know. And so I feel that gave me an advantage on how to process everything. And once I realized that David Ferry was in Dallas and no one else has ever, come up with that, I realized there's a lot more here. And yes, I can actually dedicate my time to this and it'll be worth it. Um, because 60 years, this is like they said in the JFK film, like Kevin Costner said, he's like, no, this is a crime, Bill. And that's exactly what it is. It's a crime with perpetrators and MOs and alibis and just everything you would expect from a crime. And crimes can be solved. This isn't mystical. This isn't some, bigger than, this isn't like the ultimate twist, even though it is the ultimate twist. When you boil it down, you have a murder, and a murder can be solved. And that's basically how I approach this.
Yeah,
So
I
I
think
hope I
it's
answered your
important.
question.
No, I think it's important that you mentioned the law enforcement because I wanted to mention that. So thank you for bringing that up. So that's taken care of. For people, I want to bring in folks who are listening who may not be familiar with this JFK community. You told me something when we were introducing ourselves that you're persona non grata within this community.
Right.
Tell me what the JFK community is for people, and then why is your work controversial and why are you being dismissed?
That's a really good question. You see, so when I started researching and figuring things out, I would got into all the typical forums, the education forum and the JFK boards, and like I was in all those places, and every single thing I would post, I have pictures of Alvin Bobouf and Leighton Martins in Dealey Plaza. Plain and simple. They were there. The whole alibi story is bogus. And I would post that on like the education forum, and I would get mocked from everybody from Greg Parker to James DiEugenio to all the people you would think would want to absorb new information. Prove to me they're a bunch of hacks, and that they are the kings and the gatekeepers of the space, and they're the ones that need to have this information. And if they don't discover it, it's not a thing. And so probably it took me about 3 years of constant rejection in this community before I really just unleashed on these people to call them out for the frauds that they are. I'm not going to name any names. The same people keep revolving in the JFK research world over and over again who've never solved a damn thing, and these people reject my work like it's heresy. It's unbelievable. I'm convinced that some of these people work for the government and some of these people are COINTELPRO type people. And I'm convinced that other people just have massive egos. But here's the deal: none of them want to know the answer because all answers lead to the place that nobody wants it to go. And so,
Why is that? Why is the truth not wanting to be discovered, in your opinion?
because because the truth is 100% directly has a bearing on what's going on in the world today. Okay, here's the bottom line: Israel, the U.S. mafia, and the CIA in 1963 are one organization. That's a fact. That is a reality. And so that is the body that murdered Kennedy. This alliance, but make no mistake about it, this is a Zionist operation. Okay, the mob is run by Jews. That's a reality. Mickey Cohen and Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky, Albert Anastasia, Lepke Buchalter, the biggest names in the mob of all time were all Jews, and they controlled the mob. Meyer Lansky established the International Syndicate that basically he had deals with the triads. You know what I mean? Like that guy was not a local Italian thug. Okay. So they're Zionists. Once they realized back in 46 that the Israelis were trying to get a state, they formed a relationship that was like, it was like this. I mean, it didn't get any closer, particularly, and that focused around Los Angeles between the Bugsy Siegel, Mickey Cohen clique. And that leads us to Al Gruber and the phone calls made after Oswald was arrested, right? So, like, you have this entire Zionist clique running the mafia in Los Angeles. And then you have the CIA, which is run by Zionists. For some reason, Bill Donovan and Dulles and Angleton and all these guys were Zionists. They work for Israel. They didn't work for us. And then you have the Israeli Zionists and the Mossad, and that's Menachem Begin was in Los Angeles. Yitzhak Shamir was in Los Angeles. Yitzhak Rabin flew into Dallas the night before. This is a Zionist operation from start to finish, period. And what's happening today in the Middle East is what Kennedy was trying to prevent, and that's why they killed him. He was going to end all funding to Israel, and people are like, oh, Israel, that's so stupid, and they don't understand the relationship because going back to like you have to understand, like they started trying to get Israel back in like 1917 or something like that. So the idea that they had Israel to save themselves from the Holocaust is a rewriting of history. It's the creation of Israel is the biggest conspiracy in the world. It's the proof that conspiracy theories are true. And I don't want to get into like the fine details of this, but ultimately our government was sold out to the Israelis from day one. We've been in, and once they killed Kennedy, who was the last bit of opposition, we've been an Israeli colony ever since. And so then when you look at the killings of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy in 68, for me, the world ended in 68. Like, I don't care about anything that happened after 68. The stage has been set. 1968, when they killed Kennedy and Martin Luther King, that was like in Star Wars when Grand Moff Tarkin walks in and he goes, "We've just disbanded the Galactic Senate. The last semblance of the old republic is now gone." That's it. That's it. They took over our country when they killed Kennedy, and the last bastion of hope or rebellion died with Robert Kennedy. And so, for me, I don't care about nothing after 68. Okay. It's about how we got to this position. And so, that's
Mhm.
basically the background of what's
Yeah.
going on in the world today. It's the same people, minus the mafia, because the mafia went legit at some point. So, it's basically the intelligence communities of Israel and the United States that are attempting to dominate the world. They're doing all the massacres and genocide over in the Middle East. This is what Kennedy was trying to prevent, and that's why they killed him.
Corey, not to inject my own work here, but I do want to mention that the research I've been doing with Paul Cummings on the clean towel laundry service truck that was parked at Elm in Houston is pointing to exactly what you're talking about. The people who owned that linen supply industry, which of course we know is always a mob business anyway. An industry that's always mob is also pointing to many of the Los Angeles names that you're talking about, and ultimately Sonneborn and the Hagedorn.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And so the Los Angeles thing is fascinating because who do we have from Los Angeles in that little click in Dealey Plaza there that day? You got Brading,
Right?
right? Courier from Meyer Lansky, who was tight. He was super tight with Jimmy Fratiano and all the Los Angeles guys. And who else you got? You got Jack Lawrence, who I haven't really figured out what Jack Lawrence was up to that day. I mean, there's pictures of the guy in the plaid shirt back on in the knoll in the same photograph as William Seymour. I don't know what his role was. He might have been the guy who got out of Jack Ruby's truck with the
Right.
rifle. That's probably him, but that's probably all he did. He was probably just a courier delivery guy, standing around. But he was LA Mob too. He was a lower guy for the LA Mob. So LA Mob is entrenched in this thing to the hilt. And then the phone call to Al Gruber, who Al Gruber becomes the right hand man of Mickey Cohen. And Mickey Cohen, by 49, Menachem Begin was his personal rabbi.
Yeah.
The relationship began in 46 with the meeting of Reuven Daphne and Bugsy Siegel. And then by, 47, 48, you got Sonborn
Mhm.
directly with Ben Gurion and Meyer Lansky directly in New York City. Like, oh my God, the biggest mobster that's ever been with the founder of the state of Israel cutting deals to smuggle weapons out of our country.
Right.
And the CIA knew and they helped. The CIA knew and they helped. We live in a land of traitors. The way I see it, America ended November 22nd, 1963. I was born without a country. You know, that's kind of how I feel about it.
Gruber went to the same synagogue as the owners of this laundry truck in Los Angeles, and the attorney who represented this laundry truck was one of the few, because as you know, the Sonneborn Institute was an elite organization at first, just a select group of individuals. He was
Right.
one of these individuals who was recruited to run arms.
So
So,
Sonborn, let me comment on this real
yeah,
quick. I'm 100% convinced that Sonborn is far deeper than most people realize. So David Ferry and his guys, you know about the Homa burglary, but there was like three. They did like two other bunker burglaries also. And then when you read Gary Ween, you read about the Oxnard burglary in California. And it's like to me, this is continuation of Sonborn. This is all still Sonborn in the 1960s, almost 20 years later, because all those weapons we know, thanks to Gordon Novell, got sold to Inter Armco, via Samuel Cummings, and they didn't make their way to the anti-Castro Cubans. All those weapons and arms that were stolen made their way to Israel. It's like, oh my God. That's why the anti-Castro Cubans to me crack me up because they're such a red herring. They're such a distraction. There's only two anti-Castro Cubans tied up in this whole thing, and that's Arcacha and Emilio Santana. That is it. And they were working for Marcelo, so they weren't there on behalf of anti-Castro Cubans. It's a whole red herring. It really is. I'm really tired of hearing about Mexico City and like all that stuff. It's like, dude, shut up about it already. That's all the documents we get is Mexico City, Mexico City. And when you go through, I've read the testimony of every single person who worked at that Mexico City station. They all passed the buck. They're like, oh, that wasn't my job. I did this. And then, oh, that wasn't my job. He was supposed to do that. And I mean, they literally passed the buck. It's obvious they were covering something. And then when you trace Kerry Thornley to Mexico City three times in a year, it's obvious he was the guy who went there instead of Oswald and that he was prepping his visit in the two previous visits. That whole time for Kerry Thornley he says February of 61. I think he's a liar. I think it's January 61 because I'm pretty confident he was the guy at Bolton Ford. And so from then all the way through, like his everything he does in New Orleans is so fascinating because it's all mob tied, it's all CIA tied. He's a liar about everything. He's never where he's supposed to be. He's meeting with Lauren Hall and Warren Reynolds in freaking Whittier, California, at a meeting of the States' Rights Party, right? Connected to McIntyre and that whole weird crew who are pretty much irrelevant also. Those guys don't have much to do with this stuff, even though a lot of people like to think they do. But
I,
yeah, that
I
whole. Oh, go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, I think we're gonna get into this. I think as we go on, hopefully, if my because I want to jump into these things, but let's back up and say, well, wait a minute, Corey. Costner doesn't get into any of this stuff, and Stone has no mention of Zionism in there. So what's going on, man? Because that's supposed to be the sort of Rosetta Stone for how we're supposed to approach the JFK assassination.
Right. Yeah, so that film never should have been made. I'll be honest, it never should have been made. If that film was never made, we would be no closer to understanding who shot Kennedy today. But because they made that film and they had it was arrogance and it was they always have to brag about what they did. And that's what this was, because that film was produced by Arnon Milchan, who's a confessed Mossad spy who directly with Netanyahu smuggled nuclear triggers out of our country. Okay. They rewarded him by giving him a freaking position in Hollywood as a mogul, right? It's disgusting. And so that's an Israeli propaganda film. And it doesn't mention the Israelis, and it tries to put all the blame on the CIA, right? Is the CIA going to blame themselves? No. The Mossad has no problem blaming the CIA, which is what they did in that film. The problem is in that film that it spurred so much interest that it got the JFK Records Act passed, and it got a slew of records out, right? And so um, those records that came out in the early 90s are great. Like, we don't need any more documents. Every single document dump we've had since 2017 has been pure garbage. Like, there's not one single page in any of that stuff that has any value at all. They're giving us the leftovers that really mean nothing, and 90% of what they give us are known as best known copies, which are mean that we already got the document, but this one's a little cleaner. Like these people are corrupt.
So I
So
think people need to know what you're saying here. You're saying all of this, this current task force, all of this attention that has been on the records being dumped, and all of this is meaningless.
100%. Yeah. So I'm sorry, and I don't mean to be an arrogant prick. Until I get a phone call to explain to somebody what the hell happened, this is a joke. Because nobody else is explaining. Nobody else is putting together the pieces and showing who the shooters were and bringing those shooters back to the larger scale, apparatus at all. And I don't even care. I wish that Jefferson Morley or one of these guys would just take my book and go take credit for it. Just go get the documents, solve this thing, and take credit for it. I don't even care about that. I just want the truth out there, and they're never going to do it. And like I've had back and forth with Jefferson Morley, the guy will never read my book, or if he does, he'll never admit it, and he'll never bring any of the information in my book to Luna or any of the people. I know for a fact I've had at least 4 or 5 people. Luna has received no less than 5 copies of my book sent to her office in Seminole, Florida. So she's got my book, right? Who else has my book? Bobert's got it, and I've sent it to like a dozen politicians, right? They got my book, but I still don't have a phone call, so nobody gives a damn about what happened, or nobody read the book, or something, you know?
Wow. Let's talk. There's two authors that, from my understanding of your work, there's two authors that you kind of aspire in terms of get a lot of inspiration from. If I'm correct, who are they?
Oh, I'd say Albarelli.
Okay.
For
Okay.
sure. Albarelli's coup in Dallas is great. He called it the definitive work, and it's really good, but it's not definitive. And he made a lot of assumptions that were wrong. But here's the thing: a lot of people dig up data. See, I'm not a guy who digs up data. The data's already out there. Okay, I'm a guy who connects dots. And so there's a lot of guys out there who are amazing at digging up the dots. Albarelli and like Michelle Meta and um, John Armstrong.
Yes.
John Armstrong is the king of digging up dots. Very bad at making some conclusions, but like that's the thing I noticed. You have a couple different kinds of researchers. You have researchers who go out there and they pull the documents and they dig up the data points. But in all these years, there's only been a handful of people who've attempted to even connect them. Even though, like, I have some beef with AJ Weberman, but Ed Weberman put himself out there and made some conclusions. He's like, "Hey, this is what I'm concluding." Thank God, because all these other people put out books and they're like, "Oh, look at all this data. I wonder what happened," right? And that's their book. And I'm like, I didn't need that, right? Give me what you think happened. And Weberman did that, and Armstrong did that, and a couple people have done that, but most people don't. They don't pull the trigger. They'll leave the information out there for people to kind of make their own conclusion. And it's like that's not how police work works. So being a cop, when you come across things, like it's very, very simple. If I go to a robbery at a house and the suspect left in a red Mustang, and then I go to a robbery of a gas station and the guy's like he left in a red Mustang. It's the same guy, okay? It's not even rocket science, okay? A red Mustang did that one and a red Mustang did this one. They're the same guy. That's how police think. It is that simple. You don't need to get forensic analysis of the tires or anything like that to figure out it's the same guy. And so that kind of stuff pops up in Kennedy all the time and is just purely overlooked because why? I don't know. Like very simple things that should be very easy to connect. Like here's an example. So once you get through the Tippett shooting, you come to understand Tippett was shot at 106. He was not shot at 116 or none of that. None of that makes any sense. Witnesses all put it around 106 to 108. Witnesses on scene helping him by 110. You know, it was shot at 106. The person at the boarding house left there at approximately 102. Okay, you got zero point 0.8 miles to go. Obviously, nobody could walk that. The person had to be driven there to make it that quickly, right? And so that's an obvious conclusion. But people will still try to make that stupid walk from the boarding house to the Tippett shooting, trying to see if they can do it. It's like things that are so brutally obvious are just overlooked and not put into any kind of finality. And that was super frustrating for me when I started getting into this.
Wow. We'll get back to Armstrong and his findings. Let's talk about your impact, the impact you had from Michael Collins Piper.
Right. So Michael Collins Piper is great because he was the first person really to uncover the Israeli connection through like Sam Bloom and the Dallas Citizens Council. And he realized that while everyone was saying Dallas was a hotbed of right-wing activity, that was not so much the case as it was that really Dallas was run by like a Jewish underworld, so to speak, people who were directly connected to the mob. Guys like Sam Bloom and Morris Jaffe and all this stuff. And this is why it brings Zapruder into question on what he knew and what he didn't know because he was partnered with all these guys who were definitely involved in this, right? Like, and if I'm not mistaken, Zapruder ran or was connected with the Maryland Belt Company, which was on the third floor of the Daltex building. And that's where everybody kept getting, everyone who got busted said they were going to the third floor to use the phone. But there was no phone on that third floor. You had to walk into the actual Maryland Belt Company through a swivel door, and then there was a phone on the left. You had like it was like the company phone on the wall. You couldn't just go up there and use a phone. So everybody up there, given the excuse that they were, going to the third floor to use the phone, obviously was told that, and that was probably some sort of safe place for them to go. And that was Zapruder's place. So it's like, what did he know, right? Um, so yeah, but that's Zapruder. The whole thing at the Daltex, like that really, and Jim Garrison uncovered this. Like, how did Jim Garrison put it? He said that it was all Jewish businesses, and that after the assassination, all of them moved all the businesses together moved to another building, which is pretty fascinating. But yeah, that was definitely a hideout that's connected to Sam Bloom. And then you have like the Larry Floor incident. You got Jim Braden going in there, all this suspicious stuff surrounding that. Shooter at the Daltex was not inside the Daltex. He was underneath the fire escape. I found this because I played, thank God for Photoshop, right? I played with like the filters and the contrast and all that. And underneath that fire escape, you see a head and two hands like this emerge out of the darkness when you adjust the contrast. And so, yeah, the shooter was right there. I put that as Emilio Santana. And then that connects to the second floor lunchroom story, which never happened. That connects to all that stuff. Like so to me, the most fascinating stuff is when you piece together what happened inside the book depository. Because it totally changes what we're told about everything, including the time frames, what really happened inside the building. The Coke story never happened. That was totally false. That actually happened between the third and fourth floor, and there was no Coke involved. And the guy was wearing a light brown jacket, right? So you see how they just made stuff up.
Yeah, I think well, I think people should know, Corey, kind of you demolish the official story in so many ways, and it's quite mind-boggling at first, but you don't do it for sensationalist purposes. It's everything that you present has documentation or photograph evidence, or, that sort of thing. So we'll get into that because the idea of identity transfer and the demolishing of the official story is huge. But I want to go back because you started to point out the origins of this, I don't know, monster by quoting Albert Pike. So tell me a little bit about what you're hoping to get out of that.
Oh, well, I started a new podcast on the Freemasons because the Freemasons, they popped up too many times in my Kennedy research for me to think that they're not important. And I realized that I didn't want to contaminate my other research my other stuff with the Freemason stuff. So I just decided to put it on its own podcast just to keep it separate. But those people are a bunch of weirdos. It's all Jewish mysticism. I mean, honestly, that's what it is. It's Kabbalah. When you read through the texts, it's all about Jewish mysticism. And so obviously the Freemasons, see, they keep. I hate the conversation always has to come back to this. Like, because it's misinterpreted, right? I talk about Jews a lot, and it has nothing to do with animosity or my personal feelings. It's a historical thing, right? But it appears as though Jews have found various ways to recruit non-Jews into their own causes over the centuries, and the Freemasons is the glaring example of how they do that. They don't really tell you what's going on until you get to the top levels, and ultimately they're Luciferians. That's the kicker. The Luciferians are not Satan worshippers. The Luciferians think that Lucifer was kicked out of heaven by an evil god, and that Lucifer was actually the benevolent God who created the world and all that stuff. So they think God is actually Lucifer. So that's where all the symbolism and all the weird stuff comes from. And that's crazy to me. These people are lunatics. I don't want to hear nothing about it, okay? I was always blown away because I never envisioned that people who I thought were smart would engage in this kind of activities or, the high level religion, crazy, the really extremist religious people. I was like, smart people can't engage in that kind of stuff. So what's going on here? I never really realized that this stuff is very real and that these people they're occultists. This is the bottom line. They're not really religious. They're occultists and they believe in weird stuff. And I don't know where it originated from, but these people control our society. It's like, I can't believe this. It's like, beam me up, Scotty. There's no intelligent life down here, you know?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really, it's a shocking thing. And so I'm going through these texts to figure out what's their deal, what their deal is, because
I
I've seen
think
them pop up at least three or four times, definitely in Kennedy. So
not to interrupt, but I think it's important that you're saying that you don't want the conversation to go that way, but look, if that's where the truth is going, you got to go there. And look, I'm a Catholic. I went to the same high school and college as Mary and all
that's
that.
crazy.
And
That's so
I'm, but
crazy.
I'm not going
Because
to hide that there was a Catholic, entity going on there. And if there's things going on within the church or the Vatican that need to be pointed,
right,
you got to point out. And I'm not going
right.
to pretend it. So if that's where it's going, that's where it's going to go,
You
right?
see, I love talking to people who have done like you went to the same school as Ferry, which means that you walked down the same hallways. You probably had the same visceral reactions to the environment. You got a glimpse into David Ferry's mind. And that's, to me, that's priceless. That is priceless to experience some. Like, I'll be honest with you, I want to buy him 1961 Mercury Comet Blue just so I know what he felt like when he was driving around. You know
Wow.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, putting yourself into these people's mindset, you come to understand what created them. And with these people in particular, these spooks, Fairy, Shaw, not so much. He's kind of a cut and dry character with his background in OSS. And I mean, it's natural evolution and how he got in. And he's a gay dude. And so he was easily recruitable because that they found homosexuals to be very easily manipulatable back in the day. I don't know how they came up with that, but they did. That's why you see all these weird gay dudes popping up in New Orleans and stuff, right? Um, but yeah, David Ferry to me is the most fascinating person like of all time. Probably him and the real life of Oswald. Like
Yeah.
this is this this is what gets me out of bed every morning. I've been doing this. I've been a historian for over 10 years. I've been on Kennedy for just over seven and change. And like this stuff still, I can't wait to get out of bed and get on in my computer and start working. Like it still grips me like it did when I started, all many years ago.
Yeah, that's definitely evident, and your passion is
And the
is very
passion's important, man. Like people have to have a burning curiosity. Like a burning curiosity. There's some things that I need to know that I can't know, and it keeps me up at night. You know what I mean? So,
well. I think
yeah.
you're representing a new wave of folks who are younger than the kind of the gatekeepers of the
Yes.
Kennedy thing, and
Yes.
it's a different approach. It's a different mentality that I think you're shepherding that there others are following with you in that. So that's exciting.
Yeah. I'm puzzled by the you see, here's the thing with Kennedy. You don't know when certain documents came out. So you read someone's book and you're like, oh, how could they overlook this thing? But maybe that thing didn't come out for years later. But there are some books by some people who are major heavy hitters, like James Douglas. Like his book is like an epic. You know what I mean? Norman Mailer's book on Oswald
Oswald.
is like a freaking, it's like that thick. I mean, like these are incredible intellectuals who are not jokers. And they didn't solve shit. I'm like, what is going on when the genuinely smartest and best of the best are still stumped over this stuff? Doesn't offer much hope, right? Like if someone hasn't solved Kennedy in 60 years, why should anyone today have any hope that they could solve it? You know what I mean?
But it's there. It's there. I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's your phrase about being afraid to pull the trigger, possibly.
Yeah, that's a big thing. It's like because I pulled the trigger on some things that I was wrong about. Like my first identification of the Knoll shooter was Jean-Pierre Lafitte, and I was wrong because I can tell you with certainty the Knoll shooter was recruited by QJ Win. QJ Win was a assassination recruitment program. There were two guys. It was Otto Skorzeny and Jean-Pierre Lafitte. Albarelli confirmed that. And I had suspected that for many years because of the constant references to Madrid and Marseille in the ZR rifle files, right? It's like, duh, it's these guys, right? So Skorzeny clearly in Dealey Plaza also
Wow.
captured in one of the photos. I'll show that to you. And they were all there. Dealey Plaza, they all had to be there. But I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
lost my train of thought
No,
where I was
it
going
was
with
a
that.
who's who, but so your work on the Freemasons will ultimately will that coincide or will that parallel what happened in 1895 with Theodore Herzl's announcement or intention of forming an Israeli state?
Right, that I don't know. That I hope to figure
Okay.
out. That I hope to get to. But mostly for the Freemason stuff, I want to have it out there because as I'm doing it, I give some kind of analysis on my perspective and this and that. So really, my main goal is to get through this morals and dogma text. If for no other reason, we have a permanent record of an analysis of that text, right? And so I don't know how much deeper I'll go beyond that because I swear I read these people's texts and my eyes start to glaze over and with their freaking mysticism and their symbology. And I'm like,
Yeah.
ah,
Yeah.
it's like, shut up. It's
Yeah.
like, shut up. I don't
Right.
want to hear it. You know, it's like,
Well, it's that 19th century run-on sentences too that just keep
yes,
going on and on. But I'll tell you, JFK, I won't mention his name, but you actually mentioned him earlier, but he's really taken the criticism against my work is ultimately ad hominem against me as a person,
right,
right?
right,
Um, and he's pointing out that my undergrad at John Carroll, where Ferry was for 3 years, was in Latin. That was my undergrad, and it opened up my eyes to a lot of things. When you're reading Morals and Dogma, there are so many classical references to the Roman Empire and that sort of
right,
thing. That I would not have known all of that if I'd actually read Caesar and read Cicero and read Suetonius and all that in Virgil in the original Latin. It's given such a context, and I think for you come back to that about context, context, context. Um, what are you talking about when you say that all the time?
Well, I just find that like history is the conversations surrounding history are framed incorrectly very often. You know, like Kennedy. What's the Kennedy official conspiracy theory? That the CIA killed Kennedy over Vietnam, right? That's not true. Well, that might have been a factor in the CIA's motivation, but the CIA didn't have to have the same motivation as the people who gave the green light. You know, they didn't have to have the same motivation as the guys who pulled the trigger, right? Like David Ferry and those guys who pulled the trigger who had like personal motivation, their personal motivation was irrelevant to the guys who ordered the killing. You know what I mean? So there's this overlap here. So when it comes to, I just find that people have um a wrong interpretation or they look at history from an angle that they should be looking at it from a different angle. You know what I mean? Like the main like narratives. That's basically what I'm saying. Narratives that we get on history are never right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so and the narrative on Kennedy, the conspiracy narrative on Kennedy is the CIA killed Kennedy for Vietnam, right? It's like so sophomoric. Um, but that's what I mean by reframing the conversation.
What are your conclusions on the presence of the radical right and like the white supremacist aspect of things?
You mean back in Kennedy's day?
Yes.
Okay, so those guys, here's the thing, like all the it's weird because first off, I have to reframe the conversation. Back then, everybody was a racist. Okay, that's just how it was. I mean, everyone was racist. It's not, it was, this is how it was, right? I love it when I'm talking to people about World War II and they're like, well, Hitler was a racist. I'm like, what are you talking about? It was the 30s. Shut up. You know? So everyone's a racist. And then you have the extremists who are very extreme. And that's like the National States Rights Party guys. And that's like the Carl McIntyre group and all that California, LA group. But those guys were involved in like a lot of fundraising and they put on like, they would go around and they would have like meetings. And that's what they did. They had a lot of that kind of stuff. So you have the butting up against of our guys like Lauren Hall, who spoke at these meetings, and Howard and Seymour, who went by Tex when he was out in LA. And he like all these guys knew each other. That to me is about as far as it goes. Um, because you have to think like if you're going to kill the president, you're not telling anybody. You're going to have your little inner circle, and that's going to be it. And the inner circle in New Orleans was it was a big inner circle. I mean, like and I'm convinced that nobody outside of the shooters really and the inner planners knew. Like to me, the biggest hint to all this stuff comes back to the Thomas Beckham HSCA testimony, where he talks about going into a meeting with Vincent Marcello and Roswell Thompson, Anna Burglass, David Ferry, and a couple Cubans. And he goes to this meeting and they give him a package to deliver to Mr. Howard at the Executive Inn in Dallas. I'm sorry, duh. How many Mr. Howards are in the story? One, right? How many Husky Latinos with a pockmarked face are in the story? One, right? Oh my God, they're the same person. So once you see that people reject his testimony, and I'm like, it clearly fills in this gap right here that is obviously true. Right. And so I definitely believe Beckham's testimony about meeting with Lawrence Howard, bringing him the maps and the money, and Lawrence Howard getting frustrated because it wasn't enough. Right. That all makes perfect sense to me. Right. And that links all those guys. And so you have an inner circle in New Orleans. Who's your inner circle in New Orleans? Once you get outside the mob connections, like the Vincent Marcello and the Roswell Thompson connection, which is the mob CIA connection, and it's like it falls into that category with guys like Fred Lee Chrisman and Jack Martin and like Bob Lavender and like that whole crew of like you don't really know who they are, what they are they mob, are they So you've got like outside of those guys, you got David Ferry, you have Clay Shaw, Sergio Arcacha, Emilio Santana. Then you got Hall Howard Seymour, then and Kerry Thornley, and then you have on the fringes of that you got Carlos Quiroga and a couple of those other guys. But I haven't seen any connections to the assassination for some of the guys in this inner circle. Carlos Quiroga, definitely not. The Manuel Garcia, no. None of these other Cubans I can connect to the assassination in any way, shape, or form, which tells me that the shooters were the inner circle and there wasn't anybody else involved. There were not any other Cubans involved other than Sergio Arcacha and Emilio Santana. And then that brings us back to like the Sylvia Odios, which we have the confession from Lauren Hall that it was them, right? So I mean it's obvious. And that leads to the impersonations of Oswald by William Seymour and the linkage to the husky Latina with a pockmarked face, right? So you see how all these pieces of the puzzle interconnect and then provide substantiation for other things, right? Back to Bolton Ford, obviously husky Latina with a pockmarked face at Bolton Ford, Lawrence Howard. So once you see that, it's always him. Always. Even when you have testimony to the contrary by the FBI, like the Harvey Llewellyn Wade who saw Lawrence Howard at the Carousel Club, but then said, nah, his expression on his face was too stern, so it couldn't have been him. Give me a break. Of course it was him, right? So, and that comes back to having police experience. When you interview like a dozen witnesses to a crime, you are going to get a dozen different statements on what the guy looked like, how tall he was, what kind of shirt he was wearing. And I know this from personal experience. Like, and you have to learn how to deal with that. And you can just apply that to the witness statements in Kennedy and realize who's full of it, right? Like Tippit, you got three witnesses who matter. Everyone else is irrelevant. You got Akila Clemens, Frank Wright, and Doris Holland. Everyone else can take their statement and shove it because it's totally garbage, right? So I'm sorry. I have a tendency to like go off track a little. So
We're going to touch on identity transfer, but before I do, how careful are you in your research and in your studies? Because you read all the files, but when you see, and you make a point, actually, you make a point about not going and reading the books
right.
that are out there. Okay, but let me ask you the question though. Um, how careful are you when you see things like Harry Dean testimony, Robert Easterling from Reasonable Doubt, and dare I say, Judy Very Baker?
Yeah, so let me talk about Judy Very Baker. She definitely worked where she said she did, but that doesn't mean that she had all those other connections. The stuff that she says about Oswald to me is like ridiculous. And once I concluded that Oswald didn't work at the book depository, it was not actually possible for him to have worked at the book depository, because if he's not there on the 22nd, he couldn't have been there any other day, because you're not going to have a second person come in called Lee Harvey Oswald and have people go, "What?" Right? People are going to be like, "Who the hell is this guy? That's not Lee Harvey Oswald." Right? So obviously Lee couldn't have been there ever, and the person who had worked there was never Oswald. It had to have been William Seymour the whole time. It's the only logical thing that makes sense, because they're not swapping out people as Lee Harvey Oswald within the confines of his employment there, right? And so, oh man, I lost my train of thought. Where
No,
was I going with
I'm,
this?
I'm talking about folks who inject personal testimony
Right.
into the case and how you sift through these claims. I think Baker's kind of obvious, but when you see like a
Yeah.
Harry Dean who supposedly knows Lauren Hall and those guys,
Right. Yeah, I just assume, like, I've read his stuff on the education forum. I just assume he just doesn't know. I mean, when I read the statements from Jules Rico Kimball, who was a Fed informer, he was pretty clear that he knew those guys well, and he knew what those guys were up to in Dallas, right? So that contradicts statements by guys like Harry Dean, who I think were more on the outside than they claim to be, you know?
okay, okay,
Um,
all right. So let's talk about then identity transfer. What you say is something very compelling, and you're basically saying what we're seeing that happened in Dallas is what classic what spycraft,
yeah,
tradecraft going on. Tell me a little bit about
yep. So when you really get into the Oswald story, and let's just talk about within the confines of the assassination, you'll find that Oswald is being impersonated, and he's being impersonated in a couple different places, and he's being impersonated by two people. Then you can conclude that he's being impersonated by two, well, I say two primary people, because we have an incident of Larry Crawford going to the Texas Employment Commission with, that. So, but that's like a one-off. And I think that happened accidentally, and we'll talk about that in our research chat later. But um, I think that when it comes to Oswald, I'm sorry, man. I lost my train of thought again. Where are we going with this? It
I
kind of
want to
I got
introduce
ahead of myself.
I want to introduce for us for people
The
tradecraft
identity
and
transfer,
identity
the
transfer.
identity, right? So identity transfer is a concept that goes back, like, honestly, I'm finding way before the CIA. And identity transfer is where you have a person who then borrows the identity of another person, and they do spycraft under that, right? So like I read in a book called it was a book about CIA tricks and how they pulled off some of their covert stuff. And it talks about, like, when you do an identity transfer, the people don't really necessarily have to look alike, right? You can have a guy walking down the street with a briefcase who's dressed a certain way with a certain hat, and for a split second he'll dip into a building and come back out again. But when he comes out, it's a different person dressed in the same exact thing, right? Meant to throw the person off of their trail. Um, that I found occurring. Well, we won't talk about Oswald's early life yet, but as far as the assassination goes, once you start to see Oswald showing up in places with people like a large husky Latino with a pockmarked face giving the name Lee Oswald, you come to realize, hey, that's not Lee Oswald. So what are they doing? They're establishing a false trail. You know what I mean? But here's the problem with a lot of the false trails they left. They left false trails that they ended up not using or needing, that did not end up in the official story, but that documents came out later and showed, like the trip through Alice, Texas. The trip through Alice, Texas to me was like, that was the coup de grace for me concluding that was Kerry Thornley and Marina with their kid. Like, because
Why?
because of the witnesses who saw Oswald, immediately after leaving Mexico City, he's seen in Alice, Texas, where he goes to a radio station, tries to get a job. He's seen in a beat up old gray car with a woman and a child in the back seat. And he told the person at the radio station that she sat in the car because she doesn't speak English. Okay. This pattern, it repeats a lot. It repeats at Furniture Mart in Fort Worth. It repeats at the diner in Alice, Texas. There's literally about a dozen people who saw Lee Harvey Oswald with a woman and a child in a beat up old car, giving the name Lee Oswald immediately after. It would have been October 3rd, 4th, 5th. And then October 5th, we have the real Oswald at the YMCA. Well, the real Oswald, and I'll say allegedly, at the YMCA October 5th. And then you have him getting back to Fort Worth and then he gets the job at the book depository a week later. Okay, so that's basically the story. Um, so that was an identity transfer operation that they were pulling to set up Oswald. But see, Kerry Thornley was a little bit of a loose cannon, and he did some stuff that was stupid that led right back to him. And this incident, to me, I believe, is one of them. And one of the ways you can always tell it's Kerry Thornley and not Oswald is because you'll see Oswald described as having dirty fingernails. Oswald never had dirty fingernails. This guy was like a metrosexual. Okay, his hair, he was always shaved. His hair was always neat, and his fingernails, he was always clean. So when you see, you'll read about like Oswald taking typing lessons in Dallas. Right? He didn't take no lessons. That guy had dirty fingernails. That was Kerry Thornley. Okay, so this is an identity transfer operation that Kerry Thornley, I believe, took way too far, and he did a whole lot of things in the name of Oswald that didn't end up in the official story. Okay. And that was problematic. He's kind of an arrogant prick, really. And he was given a lot of freedom to do things. Like, I can tell you with certainty, and Weisberg put this in his book on the assassination industry, that it was Kerry Thornley who went and got the flyers printed from Jones Printing, right? The Fair Play for Cuba Committee flyers. Those were printed at Jones Printing. Doug Jones identified 4 photographs of Kerry Thornley as the man who had the flyers printed. Case closed. Oswald was getting set up. Kerry Thornley gave him the flyers to hand out and tell him, hey, this is your assignment for the day. Go do that, right? So that tells me Kerry Thornley was Oswald's handler in New Orleans, which makes perfect sense, which also kind of debunks the notion that he left New Orleans for 3 or 4 months from May to September, right? This is another thing I want to talk about, which is kind of off topic, but like one thing that's really important that no one has ever pointed out is that when Oswald is in Dallas Fort Worth, he's chumming it up with all the white Russians who are anti-communists. He ends up leaving Dallas Fort Worth to go back to New Orleans at like the end of April, beginning of May. Who else traveled at the end of April, beginning of May? Kerry Thornley and Robert Oswald. Robert Oswald left Fort Worth to go to Arkansas at the exact same time Lee Harvey Oswald left to go to New Orleans. And when did Robert Oswald return to Fort Worth? The exact same time that Oswald did. There's something up with Robert Oswald and his leaving to Arkansas at the exact same time that Lee. Maybe Robert Oswald was perhaps doing some of the Lee impersonations in that time. I think that's a good possibility from May to September, because that time period is crucial. That's when Kerry Thornley does his trip down to Mexico City up to Whittier. That's when we start getting the sightings of Lauren Hall with Kerry Thornley in Whittier, and then Kerry Thornley confesses that in his damn affidavit to Jim Garrison. Right. And so, yeah, this is like the most, oh man, see, that just got me on like an investigative train of thought. And like, I could just run with that all day. Like I love this stuff.
Is the idea just so that the weekend of the assassination, everyone who's I saw him. Is that the idea to kind of like, see, this guy was doing crazy things at the
Yes.
Ford dealership.
Right. So we got the Ford dealership incident, right? Where he said he's going to come back with a bunch of money. The guy who, if you read the Garrison Sprague document, the guy who actually was the manager of the of that Ford dealership, not the Bolton Ford, the Mercury dealership, right? That guy was a spook. That guy worked for the CIA. That guy was only working for that dealership for about 9 months surrounding that incident. How crazy is that? And then he went back to work for the government after that. Totally a set up staged incident. Like a lot of the things we know about Oswald were completely staged incidents, like the Sportsdrome rifle range. Oswald never went to the rifle range. The idea he went to the rifle range is ridiculous. Garland Slack gives a good description of the guy. And this guy was actually at the rifle range like a half a dozen times, not just the one time on November 12th. He actually went there the last Saturday in September, which is problematic again because, and this is great. This is how we know who's who. Okay. So we know that the person who went to the rifle range also went there the last Saturday in September of 1963. That last Saturday in September, Oswald was supposed to be in Mexico City. So definitely not Oswald, right? Who was it? It was Kerry Thornley. So it means it wasn't Kerry Thornley at the rifle range. So who was it? It was William Seymour. And how do we know this? Because he was seen with a large guy who had big feet and a dark complexion. You know what I mean? All these pieces just fit together. And so he had gone there a bunch of times in October, and he went there 3 times in November. And so that's when you get into the testimony of what was the guy's name? Was it Malcolm Couch, I think, who was the guy? There's 2 couches in this. I think one of the couches was the guy who worked at the sports room, who worked on the rifle and said it was an Argentine Mauser he worked on. Right? So like we have as part of the zeitgeist of the story, the rifle range incident, which proves he went there to shoot at targets and stuff. And none of it's true. Like none of it's true. Like, and that's when I started to realize that None of the sightings of Oswald were true. Zero. Like not a one, right? And so then to this very day, I'm still wondering, where is Oswald? He's not at the book depository. He ain't slumming it on New Orleans, handing out flyers anymore. Where the hell is Oswald? And then we start to get like little dribs and drabs that he was at Antioch College giving a talk
Right.
on Berkeley for Cuba. Then we get like he signed in at the Atomic Energy Museum in Knoxville, right? Then I conclude that those two incidents occur at the exact same time, the days leading up to when he went to Alabama to speak at
The
the
Jesuit.
Jesuit thing.
Right.
Right. So what does that mean? It means that Lillian Moret and Ruth Payne and Marina and everybody lied about when Oswald drove to Mobile, Alabama to do that talk. They lied about it because he was obviously up at Antioch giving the talk and then signed in at the Atomic Energy Museum, which were the days leading up to. Like when you look at them, the dates that they were, it was the dates leading up to him being in Mobile, which means he obviously went to Tennessee first, then went to Mobile, and then was out of Mobile by the 28th,
Yeah.
right? And so this all makes perfect sense. But this has all been covered up, obfuscated. And why did all of them lie? Why did Marina lie about it? Why are they lying to cover that he's going up to Tennessee?
Well, let's talk about it. You're mentioning some names here. You mentioned Robert Oswald. You know, we're talking about Ruth Payne, who just allegedly died. Uh, Lillian Moret. These are families. You make it a point, I believe, in your writings and readings and listening to you. You talk about families as being part of an identity transfer or being part of the company. Groups of families, right? And is that's what you're seeing
Yes,
with Oswald and not only Oswald's, the Oswalds, right?
right. Right. The Moret's, the
Family.
Paynes. I mean, like her dad worked for the CIA direct, you know. I mean, it's not even to me. Here's what I think. I think if you were going to recruit CIA families, there's it's the loyalty is exponential because not only are the kids being loyal to the CIA, they're being loyal to their parents by being loyal to the CIA. You see what I mean? So I think this whole family aspect to recruitment, and if there's a CIA family recruitment aspect, you ain't got to wait for that person to be 18. They can be 12 and you start to get him into the loop, which is exactly what I think happened with Oswald in New Orleans in his early life, where I'm at this point, I'm 100% convinced that his first cousin, John Marshall Moret, was using his name working for Dolly Shoe Company and a couple other places between 55 and 58. Why? Beats
Yeah.
me. Beats me. But I can put Oswald Natsugi clearly at times when he's working at Pfister Dental Lab, right? So
I mean,
there's something going on here. There's something bigger going on. It has nothing to do with the assassination. It has to do with naval intelligence, identity transfer operations, and why. I don't know.
what a tragedy though, Corey, to be a boy like that and to be just handled from the cradle, essentially.
Yeah, yes. And so I start to see the first divergence in the record in 1941. And
2 years old.
the only reason I know this is because Oswald was born in New Orleans in October of 39, and he's there until April of 44 when they moved to the Victor Street address in Dallas. Now he's in the Bethlehem Orphanage, back and forth at Lillian's, a whole bunch of places, but he's in New Orleans till April 44. He put on his Marine application that he went to Fort Worth in 41 and that he was in Fort Worth from 41 all the way until 56. That's on his Marine application. That's false. Then we have the first conflicts and addresses in 45 when he's supposed to be in Benbrook, but he's also in Boston and doing a trip with Marguerite where he's photographed in like Arizona, you know? She's in Arizona wearing this like huge 1930s like coat and stuff. It's wild. People back then were crazy. But I like the formality of it. You know, I honestly I was born too late. I wish I could have born in honestly 1928 would have been perfect. I would have been 18. I never would have missed the war. I'd have been here in 46. I had gotten to witness the whole everything. Oh God,
No,
that's what I wish.
I appreciate your sense of Americana because I sense that this foray for you, this investigation, has actually increased your love for what you think is an America that's gone, essentially, right? Um,
It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking.
Now, Marguerite Oswald, you think is also an identity
Yep.
trafficking individual, right?
Yep. And the more I actually focus on this aspect of it, I'm convinced that the woman who we know as Marguerite Oswald is actually Amanthe Voitier, who is her first cousin. The real,
The frumpy woman that
yeah.
we see with hanging out with the Paines and Marina.
Yep. Yep. I'm convinced that that's Amanthe Voitier. And there was an author, I think his name was Robert Duran. I can't find his book anywhere, but it's on this very subject. And he came up with a bunch of reasons why he believed Ameth Voitier was um, was this woman we know as Marguerite Oswald. And I don't agree with the reasons that he gave, but it got me thinking and it got me digging. And in digging, one of the things that like one of the things about Ameth Voitier, um, first off, her brother shot Huey Long. Okay, her brother was Huey Long's bodyguard who murdered him, which is
Wow.
wild because that means
Yeah.
that Oswald's uncle basically shot Huey Long, which is crazy. Whoever would
Well,
have thought that those.
Corey, let me just add in there, before his rise to governor, Huey Long represented the Bannister family in Monroe, Louisiana for a case. So, it's not out of the realm of craziness that this was all,
I need here. Here's what I need to do. Like it's pressing for me. I need to connect the Voitiers, particularly Paul Polo Voitier, who is Ament's brother. I need to connect him to intelligence somehow, way, shape, or form, or some sort of organization or Freemasons or something, because he's involved in the shooting of Huey Long, and I also believe he played a role somewhere in the early life of Oswald, and that's a whole other conversation. But like, I believe he's in the relationship between the Voitiers, the Moretts, and intelligence. I need to understand that because it's clear as day that there is a connection there, but I don't know what it is. So here's the thing: Ameth Voitier, born in 1896, she's just old enough, over the age, older than Marge, to be the woman who we think, because all the pictures of the real Marguerite, she's much younger looking. Okay, and so all we know about this woman, Ameth Voitier, I have some newspaper clippings where she did some sports in high school. She was a famous, like, she did volleyball and basketball in high school, just like her brother. And so the newspapers, like, talk all about that. But she's only linked to one address in New Orleans for 54 years. 54 years, one address. Nobody does that. I'm sorry. I don't care who you are. Nobody lives at one address for 54 years. And she's a nurse. And the last we ever see of her, there's no record of her except for a death allegedly after 1956. Her employment records, her address records, everything dry up in 1956. What happened in 1956? In 1956, this woman and Harvey Oswald will move into 4936 Collinwood in Fort Worth. And this will be the first time that the addresses for Lee Harvey Oswald become the addresses of the imposter, not the real one. 1956 is an incredibly important year because the real Marguerite Oswald was supposed to disappear in 56. And the woman who we call Marguerite Oswald today, the address is on paper. When you look at them, it's like Oswald's address, Oswald's address, Oswald's address. They're all the real Marguerite. 56, that changes. That changes at the Collinwood address. And the Collinwood address is the first time we have the official record of Oswald's home address being the false imposters, not the real address. This is where New Orleans gets crazy from 54 to 56. It's the wildest stuff you ever read, because Oswald's all over the place where he's not supposed to be, you know? But
Yeah,
yeah,
you make it.
so
Yeah.
it's this all connects to the identity transfer stuff because it's like they're hiding everything. And I'm pretty much convinced at this point that Lillian Moret at some point in time was impersonating her sister Marguerite Oswald. And I say that because of the Palmer McBride stuff. So this is where it gets really, really, to me, this is where I have to credit John Armstrong, who did the most amazing work on this. And John Armstrong's work is conclusive, if you ask me. So Palmer McBride, the day after the assassination or the day of the assassination, he's in the Air Force. He goes to his superiors. He goes, "Hey, I got to let you know, I knew Lee Harvey Oswald. I worked with him years ago." So they take statements from him. They investigate him. There's a whole thing done. The dates that he gives for having worked with Oswald was October 57 through about March of 1958. This is at a time when Oswald is provably in Atsugi, Japan. Well, technically he's in the Philippines, but he's in the Far East. When Palmer McBride met with John Armstrong showed Palmer McBride a photograph, and the photograph was of a woman that John Armstrong believed was the impersonator of Marguerite Oswald. Okay, and Palmer McBride looked at the photograph, and I have the photograph. I'll send it to you. He looked at it and he identified it. He said, "Yes, that's the woman that I met as who said that she was Marguerite Oswald." Great. Now we have a definitive identification from the photograph to Palmer McBride. This woman said she was Marguerite Oswald. That woman is clearly Lillian Moret. based on the photographic record alone. We only have one other photograph of Lily, and it's clearly her. It's like, duh, that is her. So we can say with certainty that Palmer McBride met Lillian Moret, and Lillian Moret introduced herself as Marguerite Oswald. And she had a son named Lee Harvey Oswald, while the real Oswald, both of them, were in Atsugi, Japan. So now we have three people. We have Oswald in three places at once during this late 57, early 58 period, because I can separate where the Oswalds were in Japan. I can totally base because we have a conflict based on his duty roster compared to the payroll records, where payroll records also indicate dates of transfer, which totally conflict with the duty roster that we have for Oswald, right? So I can show where Oswald was in Japan or the Philippines at the same exact time that allegedly Palmer McBride's working with Oswald at Pfister Dental Lab. When Armstrong spoke to the Pfister Dental Lab people, they went through the records and they didn't have any records for Lee Harvey Oswald. But in talking to people who were there then, all of them concluded, yes, it was 57, 58, not 56. That brings us back to the fact that the Secret Service and the FBI are liars and the IRS are liars because they provided records that showed Oswald worked there in 1956, which is just not possible. It's clear, it's just not possible. So, yeah, this is the identity transfer stuff. And here's how you know it's an official operation and not this some weird family thing because obviously the Marines are in on it. And the Marines did their best to keep them separated. And I believe we even have an incident in the Marines where they were going to end up on the same ship. And Oswald shoots himself in the left elbow, I believe, to get out of it.
Who was going to be on the same ship?
I believe that the two Oswalds, because I believe that there were two Oswalds, 100%. To me, the evidence is overwhelming. They were both in Atsugi, Japan at the same time, but in different places. And there's an incident where Oswald shoots himself in the arm. Lee Harvey Oswald, the real Oswald. And just so you know, during the autopsy, there's no scar on the left arm from a bullet wound where Lee Harvey Oswald was actually shot and well documented. So he shoots himself right here. We have a massive amount of conflicting information over that wound in general. I have other documentation showing it was in the leg. I have other documentation with witnesses showing it was in the wrist. I don't even know. I don't mean my brain explodes at this point. I'm like, whatever. And so, but Oswald, I believe, shot himself in the arm right here and got in trouble on purpose and ended up in the hospital on purpose to avoid being put on a ship. Because from what I can tell, Oswald's doppelganger was on that ship going to another place in the Far East. Because he ended up spending time at Corregidor and at Subic Bay and one other place where he went somewhere else, Taiwan. And so I believe he did that for that reason. And then he gets out of when you start to line up the dates of when he actually gets out of the hospital and you start to look at the boats that were going back and forth, you can pretty much tell that there were Oswald is credited as having been in multiple places throughout his entire stay in Japan. It's really wild. People came out of the woodwork providing statements to mostly the HSCA. They seem to care more than anybody about figuring this thing out. But they got a ton of statements of people who knew Oswald on different boats. They knew Oswald over here in Inakui was a place, or Inakua, or I can't pronounce it. And then Yokozuna was another place where people knew. I mean, Oswald is seen like all over the freaking place. And we only have one record of him when where he's supposed to be, which you have conflicting, like I said, payroll and duty roster records. So yeah, that whole rabbit hole is crazy. My next book will be that. My next book is going to be Oswald and the Marines. And I thought I had a solid understanding of it because I gave a long presentation on it and stuff. But in going back in preparation for the book, oh my God, there's so much more that I have to add. It's gonna be a monster. The
Well,
book's gonna be like,
the fact that Kerry Thornley is part of that same milieu too, Marines, right?
right. So I'm convinced that Kerry Thornley. So Kerry Thornley's a liar. If you're gonna start with Kerry Thornley, we gotta talk about his how he's a liar. So Kerry Thornley swears he didn't get into the Marines until late 58. He says that in high school he signed up for the reserves and that, he would go and do his like, whatever you had to do when you were in the reserves to check in and basic drills and stuff. But no, I found Kerry Thornley's full unredacted duty roster for his time in the Marines. And he went through full on basic training over the summer between his junior and senior year in high school. So after that, he goes through a bunch of other basic training. Then he's on for over a year, about a year and 2 months, what's called basic AAA man. And so I don't know what basic AAA man is. Diana Thomas, another researcher, she found it. And but I know at some point he was doing amphibious assault training because he gets to Atsugi and he participates in a massive amphibious assault drill. I'm also going through like I'm looking for like photographs of the classes of people at Biloxi, Mississippi, right? So I'm digging and digging and I find hundreds of photos and I go and going through them, I find a photograph of one guy who was in an electronics course at Biloxi through December 57. And he's talking about his Marine stuff. You know, it's a personal website, just talking about what he did. And oh my God, he posts a picture of his electronics class and who's sitting right in the front row? Kerry Thornley in December 57 at Biloxi, Mississippi, when
What
he's
made
not
you go to
supposed to be in the
Biloxi?
Marines
Why did you look into Biloxi anyway?
because this conflict in Oswald at Biloxi. A lot of conflict in Oswald at Biloxi. It looks as though Oswald he was in one class where he graduates from the aircraft control and warning operator, which Oswald was not a radar operator, okay? He never was a radar operator. He was a guy who fixed radar units. He did not work radar units. That's one of the biggest misconceptions. But he was there and graduated on June 18th, 1957. June 19th, 57, he's out and he's on his way back to visit his mom, and then he goes to El Toro where he participates in the draft, okay? However, we got a couple guys who are like, I went through Biloxi with Oswald, and we weren't in that class. We were in this class. And in his own handwriting, Oswald wrote that while he was at Biloxi, he got his GED. No, 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 no. He didn't get his GED until March of 59 during that weird couple month period where we're not really sure what Oswald was doing. So there was confusion and conflict over what happened at Biloxi and who I wanted to know who knew him where when. So I was digging through like every single I went through hundreds of photos of Biloxi. I could only find about 50 photos from Camp Pendleton. I'm trying to find because Oswald was in two different classes at Camp Pendleton. He was in platoon 2060, which is Harvey Oswald, but then Lee Oswald, I can't find what platoon he was in. I have a statement of somebody who said that he knew Lee Oswald at Camp Pendleton, and he says he should have been in this platoon or this platoon, and it's a totally different number set, and I can't find those pictures. So there's clear evidence of the identity transfer operation starting, I mean, continuing all through the time in the Marine Corps, but Biloxi was central to that because Biloxi is where he got the aircraft and warning operator course. From there, he will take a break and then he will go to Atsugi. However, we also have some conflicting information that would indicate that during this time, Oswald is also in Memphis going to aircraft mechanic school. And then when you look at Oswald's Marine record, it says he was an aircraft mechanic on some documents as opposed to an aircraft radar operator. So with the Marine documents contradict themselves. Not only that, I have two enrollment forms with two different signatures on it for Oswald at the Marines. But this seems to really, for me, Biloxi was the most important because that's where he got paired up with five guys. Daniel Powers, Bardoni, Brereton, and Martin Strand, and one other guy. I forget the other guy's name. But these five guys will basically stick with Oswald through, and all these guys are either going to get murked or disappear off the face of the earth. All five.
And
All five guys.
if people
Yeah.
follow your work, you get into these like the Martin Strand murder, for instance, and that kind of thing, so that you
I'm
can.
100% convinced he was murdered because of the two Oswald scheme and that he uncovered it because his brother was there. There was a new book came out a year or two ago called The Missing Chapter, which was about Oswald's time in Atsugi. Ended up being a terrible book. The guy who was in the Marines, who was in Marine intelligence in Atsugi, got almost everything wrong because he couldn't comprehend the two Oswalds and the conflicting data. He just ignored half. You know what I mean? So,
Could
but
could
that
could
oh,
his
go
time
ahead.
in the Corps be then a front?
I don't think so because he had to have some sort of because up until then he's got no discipline at all. The guy's got zero discipline in his life whatsoever. So they had to mold him. They had to get him ready to do his thing. So I think he kind of I think it was he was there legit. But I mean the time period. I've been trying to figure out if he spoke Russian at all because people say he goes to the Soviet Union and didn't speak Russian there. I got an audio recording of him giving a lecture there or, doing something, talking in Soviet Union. He's talking English, right? So people who knew him said he didn't speak Russian there. So I've been trying to figure out when he spoke Russian. So when you get into that, what you find is that when he leaves at Sugi, he gets back to California, December 22nd of 58. He goes on a couple weeks to Fort Worth, comes back mid-January. And then from mid-January till about the end of March, no one's really sure what's going on. His duty roster shows him going to Yuma, Arizona for some kind of drills and training. Then he goes to the like I think it was San Diego or San Francisco, and they do some more like drills. And then it's at this time in March that he allegedly gets his GED, and he takes the Russian test. It's at this exact same time he puts in the application to the Albert Schweitzer College, which I'm conflicted over that because technically the Albert Schweitzer College stuff, he wasn't supposed to go there till after 60, which means he would have gotten out of the Marines. He didn't need to flake out of the Marines to go there because the application was for after he was supposed to get out. So here's another thing that I think kind of the reason that they kept to the schedule. So when Oswald allegedly had the washout and he did the hardship discharge, that was when he was originally supposed to get out of the Marine Corps. Okay. He got delayed by 2 months because he got stuck in the brig for 2 months, which is a whole other rabbit hole. But he's allegedly in the brig for 2 months, so it delays his departure from October to December, right? And then he had like he had some time built up that he didn't use, and that was going to allow him to get out at the time that he got out. But none of that happened because he was in the brig. So I can't help but think that there is some significance as to the date that he did the defection stuff because they were originally planning for that date in the first place. But then he goes to the freaking brig and it screws the whole thing up. And then they got to come up with the hardship story. So why? Why was it so important that he defected at that time? Why couldn't he have defected 2 months later when he just naturally would have gotten out? Like, none of it makes any sense. So that tells me that he was needed for a very specific purpose and the defection had to happen at a very specific time. Why? I don't have any idea, but that's what it indicates.
Is the Oswald who defected the same Oswald who is in for a time with Barry in the Civil Air Patrol?
No, no, this is a great point because the real Oswald is the one who's in the Civil Air Patrol. We know this. The pictures are, to me, the picture is obvious. The relationships with Ed Vabell is obvious. So the person, Harvey Oswald, who was back in New Orleans during that whole time in 63, was not the person who was in the Civil Air Patrol with David Ferry.
Is the Oswald passing out the Fair Play for Cuba committee the same Oswald who's in with various Civil Air Patrol?
No. So the way I see it, unless I'm proven wrong with some of the Russia stuff, which I might be, but the way I see it, the last time we ever see or hear of the real Lee Harvey Oswald is when he gets his passport on September 10th, 1959. We have the photograph of him getting his passport. That is clearly not the guy who got arrested on November 22nd. We don't see him again after that. And if you ask me, the operation is successful. Oswald gets into the Soviet Union. There's no need for that guy to be around anymore at all, period. And Armstrong has a really good theory on what happened to him. And he participated in another identity transfer operation, got another name, and went on and did other stuff. That's how I perceive it. So everything we know about the assassination is Harvey Oswald. The person we know who was allegedly working at the book depository and arrested and then gets shot by Jack Ruby. That's all the same guy. So I don't even bring in Lee Oswald to that story at all. Totally irrelevant. Starting with Russia, everything to the end is the duplicate, for sure. It sounds crazy. And even as the words come out of my mouth, I feel like a lunatic saying it. Even though I wrote the damn book and I know all the evidence, I still got to pinch myself every once in a while to make sure I'm not crazy.
Isn't that the point, though? I mean, isn't that the point that you're supposed to feel that way?
I
I
hope so.
mean, you
Yeah.
know, I think so too. So when Ruth Payne allegedly got this individual a job at the Texas School Book Depository, who was she? Who was this individual then who walked into that building and claimed to be Lee Harvey Oswald?
So we have some major contradictions surrounding the book depository, and so there were three different names associated with the book depository. The name on the roster that was given to the Dallas Police Department was Harvey Lee Oswald. That's the name on the roster. The prior to that, the original there was a payroll list that said Lee Harvey Oswald. However, the final week that Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly worked at the book depository, the name was changed once again. And the name on the payroll records for that last week was Leslie Oswald. Why it says Leslie Oswald, I have no idea. But that's the case. That's what the paperwork says. I am telling you, the real Lee Harvey, the person that we know as Oswald, who got shot by Jack Ruby, did not work at the book depository. I believe it was just another front job, just like Jagger Charles Stovall, just like Riley Coffey, where three other Oswalds worked. I mean, like, when you dig into Oswald's employment, to me, it's apparent these are front jobs. He didn't work at any of these places. Jagger Charles Stovall, there was a guy there named Bowen. There's like three Bowens in this story. There's another John Bowen who worked at Jagger Charles Stovall who gave statements to Jim Garrison. It turns out John Bowen wasn't his real name. His real name was like Esposito or something like that, and he was a spook, right? So every single job Oswald had was a front job. And with just like William Seymour and Beach Welding in Miami. Beach Welding gave Seymour a cover for November 22nd. When I'm telling you, that guy was at the book depository, and his Beach Welding cover story held, right? Same thing. I believe it's a cover story that you go and you work, you get a job, and you get a paycheck, and like all your CIA money gets funneled through there. Just like Bilbo Trucking. We got a guy who says he knew Oswald who worked at Bilbo Trucking. He said he never saw Oswald work, but when they gave out paychecks, Oswald would come and pick up a paycheck, right? That's a front job. That's what you do. And that's where the relationships between the owners of these companies and the CIA becomes important.
Okay, let me jump in there. So the book depository, which we know dates back, it was Hugh Perry's book depository, as far back as 1908. At some point, he passes that on. He does. I mean, he dies and he's out of the picture. And then we get got O.V. Campbell and Bill Shelley and those
Oh,
guys. So
the guy that nobody mentions. Who is the real owner of the book depository? Who is the real owner of the book depository? Do you know his name?
well, not Bird because he owned the building,
He owned
but
the building, but I'm talking like
right.
this, the business itself. The
Well,
business itself was owned by a guy named Jack Kaysen.
oh yeah.
And Jack Kaysen was at the book depository all morning until 12:10 p.m., where he admits he left at 12:10 p.m. And then we have the immediate sightings of the guys on the sixth floor by Arnold Rowland and his wife. So what does that tell me? It tells me Jack Kaysen opened the door for these guys as he walked out the back door. That's what I get from this. The timing of when he puts himself at the book depository, he left at 12:10, and then immediately after he leaves, we got shooters on the sixth floor. Give me a
Yeah.
break. He
Yeah.
was connected to all the FBI and CIA guys through the American Legion, of which he was the head of. He was the head of the American
Yeah,
Legion in
you
Dallas.
see pictures of him, probably wearing that American Legion outfit, I think, like he's just
That guy was a diehard right winger. I mean, he was a guy who would have been in that clique with Byrd and the Dallas Oil Company people, and like it's a big club, and we ain't in it, And like, and I'm sure you have these cliques in every city. In Dallas, it was surrounding the Dallas Citizens Council, the Dallas Petroleum Club, the American Legion, right? These people all knew each other, right? They were all. This is where the conspiracy layer happens. So
yeah.
that's what I kind of call things. I call like there's a layer above the shooters and below the guys who gave the order that I just call the conspiracy layer. And it kind of pulls in all the generic CIA guys who would have been involved that we don't know about. All the people talk about the oil men getting involved and stuff, right? I'm sure a million people knew about the assassination, and I just kind of lumped the people who weren't involved in the boots on the ground or the very highest levels. I just kind of ignore them because they're just kind of in this conspiracy layer, that you're never really going to find any documents. It's all going to be rumblings and hearsay and whatnot.
So,
Um,
Corey, when the Texas Theater incident happens and this individual's pulled out of there and brought to, the jail and midnight press conference and then, taken down when the infamous I'm just a patsy for the fact that I lived in the Soviet Union. And there's that line too where someone says, were you in the building? And the guy says, naturally, if I work in that building.
right, right. Naturally, if I
So,
work in that building.
uh, but tell me, unpack that. So
So
what am I seeing here?
I don't know because we have another statement from, was it Curry or Fritz? I forget if it was Curry or Fritz, but he's talking, or maybe it was the DA. I think it was the DA talking to the press. And I have a video. It's in the research chat. And the press is asking him about Oswald. And He straight up says Oswald denied being in the building that day. He said he works here, but not that day. And that's on film. And we have that. And I 100% agree with that statement. I 100% agree with that. So why between then and later when he is asked if he worked in that building, I would say he's probably he's asked whether he was there that day and he says no in private. But then when he's on television, he says yes, he was in that building. Why would you do that? Maintaining a cover is the only thing I can think. He's maintaining his cover to people who would see him on TV. Because if he goes, no, I wasn't in that building, his cover is he's supposed to be in that building. So if he says, no, I wasn't in that building, he's telling his handlers, I wasn't in the building where I was supposed to be, as per the story.
Right.
So I think he was maintaining a cover when he said that.
Right. So,
I can't think of any other reason, especially if he denied it in private, you know?
well, even naturally, if I work in that building, all sounds a bit of a
It's a spy answer.
yeah, exactly. Um, there's more identity transfer going on that weekend.
Oh, yeah.
Who shot
Oh,
this
yes.
who shot this individual, Corey?
Who shot Kennedy?
No, who shot this Oswald figure?
Oh, I'm convinced Jack Ruby shot Oswald. Um, but the question becomes: was it Jack Ruby in the hallway of the Dallas Police Department? Was it Jack Ruby at the midnight press conference? Was it Jack Ruby in any of the half a dozen places that we saw him that day? And I'm going to tell you, I don't think so. Um, because Jack Ruby had a brother named Samuel Ruby, and I can tell you with certainty, Jack Ruby ended up after the assassination probably after going to Parkland. Probably Jack Ruby probably did go to Parkland, and after Parkland, he left to go to Galveston. He is seen in Galveston on Saturday. Witness statements put him in Galveston at a hardware store or a sporting goods store. I can't remember which it is. And he was allegedly buying a gun from a guy behind the counter. I don't know if that's, I don't know how the person knows he was buying a gun. But the person recognized him from when he shot Oswald. He saw the guy with the hat and the square, hairline in the back, and he's like, "That guy who shot Oswald, I saw him in Galveston," and that's the statement. And I believe that 100%. And I believe he did go to Galveston because he had to bring Jerome Blackman back to his boat. So when you get into like the David Ferry stuff and David Ferry's inner circle, David Ferry's closest associates were Andrew Jerome Blackman and Sergio Arcacha. They go and they did that whole Eric Cruchet thing. I don't know if you dug into the David Ferry files, but Eric Cruchet was like made allegations against David Ferry. They go and he had a witness to that, and they go and they threaten him at his workplace, right? And so they're threatening this fucking like 16-year-old kid, right? A big bad Cuban, and they're threatening this guy to drop his story, right? So that's
Just so people don't lose you, this is like a witness intimidation
right,
against Ferry's charge,
right,
his morals charge in
right.
New Orleans.
Yeah, he was on Eastern Airlines had fired him, and he had some charges brought for being a child molester, but all that stuff got whitewashed, you know.
Okay.
So that's where all that comes from. But Arcacha and Blackman were the two who went with him to intimidate this kid, which tells me those guys are in his inner circle. You're not going to go commit a felony for somebody if you're not in their inner circle. Those are the two most important guys in Ferry's world. And when you expand that a little bit more, you get Alvin Bobouf and Leighton Martins, and then the CAP crowd, which I'm convinced he molested all those guys. He was using hypnotism and possibly drugs at times to molest these guys. That's reality. That's the statement that was made by Cruchet in regards to it was Alexander Landry, who was the kid who had the charges brought. So,
Well, hang on
um,
before Corey. You doing okay on time, by the way?
oh yeah, I got all day.
Real quick. So before we get into Ferry, which I want to, let's just close the loop there. You make a point about Samuel Ruby and
Right.
how you're able to distinguish that. Can you share?
Yeah, so Jack Ruby's captured in the background of the Dallas Morning News footage at about 12:45. He had been there inside the Dallas Morning News since about 11 o'clock, and he was there all morning. And then he makes a Jack. Okay, have you noticed that he like made it a point to get on television like 4 or 5 times that weekend? Yeah, that was alibi stuff because Jack Ruby wasn't there. That was Samuel Ruby, Jack's brother. And so we know that Jack Ruby was out on the street. He was in the green pickup truck seen by what was it, Julianne Mercer, and right, and then that truck will pop up at the Texas Theater later. So, but we know that's Jack Ruby there. Then he's out on the street with Vanderslice, right? In that article, the Vanderslice story is hilarious. But it's clear to me that Jack Ruby was out on the street doing stuff, dropping off assassins, while Samuel Ruby was sitting up in the Dallas Morning News. And that just goes to show you how much they looked alike. And so Samuel Ruby had been in Dallas for a year and a half before the assassination. No one ever talks about this guy ever. There's like 3 pages of documents on him. You want to learn more about Samuel Ruby, you got to go into newspapers. I found more about him in old newspapers than anything else. So he used to own a bunch of washaterias up in like the Detroit area, just like his brother, Earl Ruby. And so one time he had got into a domestic with his wife, a domestic disturbance with his wife, and he got arrested. And the judge sentenced him to take his wife out on a date. I mean, like that I thought was an amazing, amazing piece of history, like. And so you learn more about his character, and the more I learned about his character, the more I learned that Jack was terrible with money, and Sam was really good with money. Sam was the smart one. Jack was the hothead. And Sam had been in Dallas for a year and a half leading up to the assassination. We need to stop and rethink everything we know about Jack Ruby. Because Jack Ruby might not have been the Jack Ruby we think that he was. He might not have been the one calling the shots. I don't have definitive proof of this yet. But when you come to understand people's character, and like this is so important, relationships and character are like more important than details in the case. And when you really come to understand the character of these people, Jack Ruby could not have been like a mastermind coordinator of anything at all. Like that to me rings of this thing was more architected at that level by Samuel than it was by Jack.
And just so people know, I mean, let's just call him like Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby, for the sake of just easiness here, Jack Ruby was deep into whatever was going on. This
Whoa,
wasn't,
yeah.
I just wanted to spare Jackie, right?
Right. 100%. He was, I mean, you got to think like the relationships at play here. He's Chicago mob. His buddies growing up are Al Gruber, Lenny Patrick, Dave Yaris. Those were his 3 best friends growing up. Those freaking guys, like I can tell you, like, the days leading up to the assassination, you have those phone calls from Jack Ruby. He calls Robert Bernard Baker. Robert Bernard Baker calls Dave Yaris. Dave Yaris calls Lenny Patrick. Like we got 4 guys in 4 cities making phone calls over 3 days. Total BS. Those are alibi phone calls. Those guys are all in Dallas. That's the reason that they made those phone calls. Those were fake phone calls to cover for the fact that they were in Dallas. And so when you
Wow.
come to understand that Jack Ruby is a mobster, and you get people like Vincent Bugliosi are like, oh, he's Jewish. He couldn't have been a mobster. What? What are you talking about? Okay, the Jews ran the mob. Okay, and they didn't have to be made guys because they controlled the made guys, and so that's how that went. And so Jack Ruby, it's written in Frank Sheeran's book. I Heard You Paint Houses. He talks about how everybody knew Jack Ruby, Red Dorfman, and Jimmy Hoffa, and like the biggest names in the U.S. mafia knew Jack Ruby. It's obvious he was the mob connection, but people don't make the connection because nobody understands that the mob's controlled by Jews, not Italians. They don't get that. And so until they get that, they're not going to understand how Jack can be involved in any of this stuff. But no, they were totally, totally deep. I'm still kind of like his involvement and stuff with like the Kefauver hearings and him working for Nixon and stuff.
HUAC, yeah.
I have some, I don't know. I have a lot of questions. There's a lot of documents missing about that. He was definitely an FBI informant, but see, all these guys were. It was just how it went. When I got into this, I never understood how you could be like CIA, FBI, and Mossad at the same time. I
Right.
think it doesn't make any sense. Now it makes perfect sense, right? And so, but that's how these guys operated back then. But no, Jack Ruby, major player. His direct mob connection, I'm convinced, was through Ralph Paul. Because Ralph Paul backed him on all the money stuff.
Yeah.
But Ralph Paul was a guy who was able to keep his distance just enough to stay off the radar of the cops. You know what I mean? But he's connected to the Chicago mob just like Honest Joe. You get into the Honest Joe stuff, Honest Joe's pawn shop.
No.
Okay. Oh man, that's a whole nother rabbit hole. Honest Joe's pawn shop, and well, Honest Joe. I'll leave it to you to do the research on that because it's gonna be fun. But Honest Joe, Ruben Goldstein, is another one of these guys like Ralph Paul, who's connected to the mob and hanging out in the background of the assassination. Honest Joe's pawn shop is a key part of like some of the movement of shooters in Dealey Plaza that day.
tell me about the finger and Ruby, and that
Okay,
was
so
good for you.
Jack Ruby got his finger bitten off in a bar fight, his left index finger. And so when he's captured on film in the Dallas Morning News in the background making a phone call, which is I think the second time he's captured on film that day, or maybe that's the first of many. But he's on the phone with his left index finger extended, but Jack Ruby doesn't have a left index finger. And we know it's not a reversal because of the writing and stuff. We can tell everything's right. So, but Jack Ruby's finger was bitten off in a bar fight. And so he doesn't have a left index finger. So it's not Jack Ruby. And it looks just like Jack Ruby because it's Samuel Ruby. And so Samuel Ruby kept popping up. And I'm convinced what happened is so the railroad man, so I'm convinced of a couple things. One of those things is that David Ferry was one of two shooters on the knoll, and that David Ferry fired the first shot that struck Kennedy in the throat. Ed Hoffman sees him to give a perfect description. I have the photographs of Ferry in the railroad yards matching that description. He throws his rifle to a guy in a railroad outfit. I'm convinced the man in the railroad outfit is Andrew Jerome Blackman, based on the inner circle stuff, the Dear Bastard letter. There's a whole bunch of number factors. But also, he was in the Merchant Marine and his boat pulled in that weekend or the Thursday or Wednesday before, and the boat left the Monday, and he was interrogated Tuesday by like everybody. And so I'm convinced that Jack Ruby, when he went to Galveston, had to take him back to his boat. And this would coincide with Saturday night at the Alamo Motel. They see a blonde woman at the Alamo Motel. The only blonde woman in the story is Candy Bar. And Candy Bar is a link, direct link from Jack Ruby to the Israelis because she was banging Jack Ruby and she was banging Menachem Begin, of all people.
Wow.
I know.
Wasn't I thought she was with Mickey Cohen
Yeah,
too.
him too. She got around. Like they passed women around. That's just how it was back in the day. You know, it was their gumad or whatever they called it. And
Well,
so
let's back up real quick. So Oliver Stone opens JFK, and he never actually follows up. He's showing a foreknowledge of the assassination with a woman who's on the side of the road.
yeah,
Uh, is she to you? She's integral to what's going on, correct?
absolutely integral. That's Rose Cheramy, real name Melba Marcotta, but she's had dozens of aliases. Her file is wild. Um, she's basically a prostitute and a drug mule, hangs out in the Marcello Jack Ruby circle. And she is catching a ride with two guys. Went by Osanto, who was Emilio Santana, and the other one, I forget what name he went by, but he was identified by Mac Manuel as having been Sergio Arcacha, which makes perfect sense to me. Those guys were in David Ferry's inner circle, and I'm convinced they were the Cubans who were at the party with Perry Russo that night that he describes the Cubans being there. And so they have an incident with her. She's a real pain in the ass. She's a heroin junkie, and they're sick of her shit. And they want to. Oliver Stone made some stuff up. They didn't throw her out of a car. They actually went into the bar, had a disturbance in the bar, and then Mac Manuel throws her out of the bar. And then she's drunk and on heroin, and she just stumbles into the street and gets hit by a car. That's how that really went down. She didn't get thrown out of no car like Oliver Stone said. Um, but she ends up telling Lieutenant Francis Fruge of the Louisiana State Police that they're on their way to Dallas to kill Kennedy. And there'd been some like scuttlebutt over whether she really said that. But after I went through all the documents, I determined absolutely she said that. She told so many people that they were going to kill Kennedy that like most of them were laughing, like, aha, whatever. Then Kennedy gets killed and they're like, holy shit. They're like, oh my God. And so they get everyone up in there. They get Francis Fruge. He gets the state police in there. They do a full investigation. This is what I don't understand. According to Francis Fruge, they identified the guy coming in, bringing the heroin, who I identified as Blackman, but they never identify him in any of the documents. The documents don't have his name. He just references that he identified him,
You're talking
which
about
is
a
weird.
seaman coming into the port to the Galveston,
Yeah. Yes. Um,
unidentified in the files.
Unidentified in the files, but they say they know who it is. So I'm like, well, tell me, right? So, but they don't. For some reason. Again, let me just make a comment on the files. We only have like a speck of dust of compared to like what's out there. Um, so I was a cop for a long time. I can tell you with certainty, if I do a basic like police report that is like a theft or something, it's a 20, 30 page report, no matter what. It's no matter what. You do a homicide, you're talking like thousands of pages, right? You have a OJ style case, something like that, like the OJ Simpson case, you're looking at probably 40 to 50,000 page police report, like no joke. Um, so we don't have anything. We got like Garrison's documents are like 2,000 pages. They're a drop in the bucket. They're like not even a percent of what his office generated He probably generated a couple thousand pages a day for years. And how many do we got in the Garrison files? We got nothing, right? So that's something people have to really consider is that we don't really have much of anything as far as documents go at all. That what we
What
do
would be an
have is
example? What would be an example of what constituting like 40 or 40,000 or 50,000 pages? Just so I
oh God,
understand.
you get a lot of cover and routing sheets. And then you get like you'll have like evidence breakdowns. You'll have it's mostly administrative stuff. Um, uh, like you'll have it depends on what agency you're with and how they structure their internal report system, but you'll have pages upon pages upon pages just listing names of people involved, what they are, witness, suspect, subject, stuff like that, and then all their information. Then you'll have like supplemental reports where like you turn in evidence and the person in the evidence room who receives your evidence, they'll take your evidence and they'll write a couple pages that they received your evidence and they logged it here. So you get a lot of stuff that has nothing to do with like the story itself, but it's administrative chain of evidence, all that kind of stuff. I've seen very basic police reports on a murder that was like it was witnesses and everybody knew who did it and they made an arrest right away, right? 2,000 pages, easy. Like on a report that's like 2 pages long. The actual body of the report's 2 pages, and the administrative stuff is like massive. Garrison's so there's a lot of information in those cover sheets though. Like I have a cover sheet that indicates it's a cover routing sheet, meaning I have documents and they're going to go to this person, and this sheet tells where they're going. And also they'll have like little summaries and they'll have this little administrative notes and stuff. I've got one from 1960 held by Office of Naval Intelligence on Marguerite Oswald that's 986 pages long. Why is there a 986 page file on Marguerite Oswald in 1960 that's held by ONI and classified forever? Why is that? I don't know. But that routing sheet, that one document, tells me a ton of stuff. Tells me a ton of stuff. Just for the fact that I know they have this 1,000 page document that we're never going to get to see, and it was 3 years before the assassination, that tells me a world of information alone. That she was connected to them. They have information on her going back to who knows what. And they have 1,000 pages of who knows what on Marguerite Oswald, right?
Yeah.
And so that all came from a routing sheet.
Okay.
So you get a lot of stuff in these reports and in these documents that seem to be irrelevant, but might hold a lot of significance, right?
Okay.
Even weird routing codes on who stuff gets routed to. If you're investigating something and you see your report got routed to like Cincinnati, but Cincinnati has nothing to do with your case, you're like, oh my God, why did it go to Cincinnati? There must be something in Cincinnati. So let me figure out what's going on in Cincinnati, right? Like I've got a couple references to San Antonio for Oswald in 1955 and 54. But I can't find anything on Oswald in San Antonio in 54. But I have at least 2 references to the possibility that Oswald was in San Antonio from January to May of 54. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
and that comes from like just little dribs and drabs. But yeah, there's something there for sure.
Just to close the circle on Jeremy, she tells Fruge, and as a law enforcement, did it kind of concern you that she says, "Oh, we're going to Dallas, we're going to Texas to kill Kennedy, but get my baby."
That's a weird story, isn't it? I feel like there's more to the story.
Okay.
I feel like there's
That's
more
to
to the
me, there's
story.
something there
Yeah.
beyond show,
Yeah. Yeah.
to get my baby. Sad. It's really sad,
It is,
you
but
know?
like that kind of operation, I'm pretty confident was pretty. That kind of stuff was standard when you're dealing with the mob type people back then, you know.
Yeah.
And especially if you're dealing with like, so everyone says the mob didn't deal drugs, which is a lie. They did deal drugs, and the connection to the drugs was the government. What I mean? So when you're dealing in that layer of interaction between the underworld and the CIA or whatever DOD or customs or whoever, that has got to be a very high pressure, high intensity, you know, interaction because it
Yeah.
shouldn't be happening at all. It's probably the most confidential. Like in the 60s, nobody could ever find out the government was dealing drugs with the mafia. It was not allowed to be known. Back then, it would have been heroin. So that would have been they would have murked people and kidnapped people to keep that secret 100%. They have no problems knocking off. They'll knock off a grandma. You know what I mean? They don't care. They have no conscience and they hire psychopaths. So
Not to veer too far off, but that's what makes me wonder there where Mario Puzo's origins for The Godfather, the real origins for where that came from, and what the point of that whole entity from Paramount Pictures was, you know.
You ask all the right questions, man.
Was that to normalize the mafia
Yeah,
for
who oversaw the
American folk?
production of that movie?
What'd you say?
Who oversaw the production of that movie?
Well, it was Robert Evans and a
Right.
certain NPAA individual.
There you go. A certain MPAA individual.
We'll get into him.
Um,
We'll get into him.
that
I just
guy,
wanted
I
to
mean,
comment.
that guy, man. You got to
Yeah.
think that guy, Jack Valenti, was the head of the censorship industrial complex before there was one. That
Are
guy
you
was the,
are you the origin of that phrase, by the way? The
yes,
censorship industry.
probably. I probably am. I don't, well, maybe not. Maybe I heard it from somebody else, but
Let
in
me tell you,
regards to,
Corey. Let me just tell you though, before the rise of the MPAA, before that, as you know, in the history of Hollywood, with the production code was in place, there was an individual, Martin Quigley, who was influential in administering that production code. Martin Quigley came from OSS.
somewhere in the mix is Lou Wasserman. And I need to dig more into Lou Wasserman because him and Jack Valenti were like this. He's the one who got Jack Valenti the gig at MPAA. He'd known Jack Valenti, I don't even know how long, but Jack Valenti is quoted as saying that if you got a problem with Lou Wasserman, you got a problem with me. So they were tight on a certain level that I don't understand.
Yeah.
Valenti, before all this, before the assassination and before all that stuff, he was connected to these LA mobsters, and he had to have been using an alias. I don't. The relationship and Gary Ween seeing him with Casper Weinberger and all those guys at Nudi's Western Wear 2 weeks before the assassination, that to me strikes me as like a massively important meeting that we know nothing about, right? And so
When you cite Gary Ween, who is the LAPD
he was
criminal
LAPD, but
investigator?
then he went to Ventura County, and his book
Okay.
"There's a Fish in the Courthouse,"
Okay.
which was only recently republished. I haven't even got a copy of it yet. But that is an expose on corruption in Ventura County, and that connects. He connected it to people like John Tower, who then connect to the mob and connect to the Kennedy assassination as
Yeah.
well.
Okay.
So
Okay, we'll get into Valenti, but so Corey, when our boy David Ferry unsuccessfully does not become a priest, allegedly, and I believe I got this from the FAA investigation during the Eastern Airlines issue. Allegedly, it's his father, James H. Ferry, who buys Ferry an airplane as a consolation for son. James H. Ferry, as you know, Cleveland Police, I believe he was a captain, seemingly a very devout Irish Catholic, donated an altar to John Carroll University when Ferry was there. So, you know, but all your talk about police and the Cleveland mob and the connections there just makes me wonder about James H. Ferry. But James H. Ferry allegedly buys David, his eldest son, an airplane as a consolation for not making the seminary. Um,
I didn't
I'm
know that story, by the way.
I'm beginning to wonder how much of what we're told about Ferry and these false starts with seminaries is accurate and how much of that what really was going on. I mean, what father buys a son an airplane and gets him into flying?
What year is that supposed to be?
40, well, he gets kicked out of St. Charles in 44, so I'd say about 45. And
Okay,
that's when he goes and
so
teaches Benedictine High School and he's teaching aeronautics at Benedictine High, which is an all-boys school.
he will end up in Tampa, Florida. In well, we have the records from 49, but he was seen with Clay Shaw at the Venice little airport connected to the 9/11 people in 47
How do we know that happened, that Clay Shaw Ferry were together in 47?
because it's in the 450-page file on David Ferry. Someone when the assassination happened, people came forward and said, "Hey, I knew this person then." And this person came forward and said, "Yeah, I knew this. I knew these guys in 47. They were run, which makes sense because that's when they were running operations against Batista, if I'm not in Cuba, if I'm not mistaken, and they were running other operations in the Caribbean out of this little airport in Venice, Florida. the same airport that the 9/11 hijackers were connected to, which is wild, which means it's been a CIA airport the whole time. Clay Shaw was the name on the lease. Clay Shaw leased it at the time.
Okay.
And so, but to me, putting David Ferry with him makes perfect sense because, okay, so here's another thing. David Ferry, you know him, he's a weirdo. He is like he lived in he lived in squalor. I mean, the guy was a not a he was a very brilliant guy, but he was a total shitbag of a person. He's not the kind of guy that a Clay Shaw, an upperclassman like that, is going to hang out with unless they have a significant background. And that's what I think the deal is. He knew Ferry for 20 plus years, by the time the assassination comes around, or
With the
15
death,
years, or right.
the death of, yeah, Ferry,
Right. That's why
20
they
years.
were, that's why, to me, the relationship being a long-standing one to me is pretty obvious. Um,
Are you cool if we pivot into Ferry
yeah.
right now? So even before this meeting with Clay Shaw in Tampa, uh, I follow the trajectory of Ferry. I understand he did 3 years at the undergrad, the Jesuit school of John Carroll. Then he transferred to the Diocesan Seminary of Cleveland, St. Mary's. That makes sense to me. It makes sense that it doesn't work out for him for whatever reason. He finishes, as you know, at Baldwin Wallace College, and
Did he actually graduate from there?
I see where you're going.
I couldn't find out. I
I'm just
couldn't
gonna say
determine.
ostensibly, yeah,
I couldn't determine whether or not he
right.
did. There's
But
not really
yeah,
much.
let's say. I mean, I'm gonna assume he did, but and then he tries one more time officially to go into the seminary down at St. Charles. It's a completely different diocese. It's a completely different order than what it's this missionaries of precious blood. My point is, though, when he's down there for a significant period of time, I mean, it's about 3 or 4 years. Um, the location is fascinating, Corey, because it's just north of Dayton, where the Air Force Base is, and it's very nearby Antioch College of Yellow Springs. So,
I've been looking into Antioch College trying to make a CIA connection there, and I don't know that I can. And I say that because all the controversy around Antioch College is that they were a bunch of liberal communists. That was the whole controversy over them. They had liberal. There was like an extreme left wing college, and so I've been looking for articles and all kinds of stuff. And the FBI even investigated Antioch for years because they considered them to be extremist leftists. So I've been unable to make a CIA connection there.
okay,
I mean, there might be one. The CIA funded opposition groups like crazy. So
yeah.
could it exist 100%? I just have been unable to find it. I'd
And we
like
know
to
that
find it.
that's
I would
it.
love to find it because it would prove that Ruth Payne was
Ruth
CIA
Payne,
connected.
who was an alum of the school, right? Um, and Corey, I don't know if you noticed that Suggs. So I just want people to know, and I hope they're following along with us. I'm trying to keep this streamlined. Is that when Ferry's name gets pointed out the weekend of the assassination by a fellow called Jack Martin, who was close with Ferry, and
Probably one of the more important investigative incidents to happen in the entire story. Like the Jack Martin phone call, unbelievable.
just for people to know, this was Jack Lemmon, if you're following the Oliver Stone film. So, and he is a character there, really more at the beginning, and he kind of fades out, of course, the course of the film. But what I found, as you know, he's not Jack Martin. He's Edward S. Suggs he's from Los Angeles, apparently, ostensibly.
Well, he moved around a lot. He spent some time in Houston. He got in trouble for doing back alley abortions.
That's right. That's
No,
right. In the early 50s. Now, Corey, in about 1943, I have his mother in Dayton in the shadow of
what
writing
is her name?
universities. It sucks.
Is it Sugg? Oh, so okay, so I don't know if you've read Coup in Dallas by Albarelli. It
Yes, it
should
was
be
one of
on.
the first that I got into, Corey.
All right, so he talks about how the identity of Jack Martin might be suspect because of the connections to Jean-Pierre Lafitte, right? And so I've tried to make this connection here with Jack Martin, Edward Suggs, and Jean-Pierre Lafitte to determine what the deal was. That I'm like I don't know,
Yeah.
because the real Jack Martin was not a he was a scumbag, alcoholic, making fake diplomas and fake degrees for the CIA and all that stuff. He was not a tactical mastermind. And as Albarelli pointed out, some of the words spoken allegedly by Jack Martin were like extremely, extremely like
Overdone.
well trained, technical, talking about covert action and stuff like that, stuff that Edward Suggs personally would never have known because he wasn't involved with. So yes, the identity of Jack Martin is absolutely to be questioned
Questioned.
because
Yeah.
that could have been just another identity transfer operation anyway. Because we
Whoever
know
that was
Jean-Pierre
that
Lafitte was using the name Jean Martin, so we
okay.
don't know.
Okay. Well, whoever that was in the shadow of the Air Force Base, where the it was the kind of the basis for the Ohio Civil Air Patrol, and down there at Wright Air Force Base, and but it was at the same time that Ferry was at the seminary right outside Dayton. It just was an interesting. Now, a lone nutter that I won't mention says you're being too much like Garrison, and you're just trying to find things that are just propinquity and closeness,
Oh, propinquity. I know what idiot uses that word. Okay, so let me explain something about propinquity or whatever he's talking about. Okay, let's say you're a cop and you're investigating a serial killer. All right, and you find that you have a serial killer on the north side of town and you have a serial killer on the south side of town. And then you come to find out that the serial killer on the north side of town has a boyfriend who lives directly next to the serial killer on the south side of town. That's called an investigative lead, not propinquity, not chance or coincidence. These are definitive avenues of legitimate investigation that every cop in the world would jump all over. So anytime anyone tries to say that it's just coincidence or I don't care what it is, the police are going to investigate it. And so to me, that person, Fred Litwin, is completely and totally a fraud. And he completely and totally, like, I've never seen anybody cherry pick data like that guy cherry picks. Like what he did with the statements of Mrs. Nicholas to Din, Mr. and Mrs. Nicholas to Din at the airport who saw Clay Shaw and David Ferry together. He butchered their statements and cherry picked it and put it in his book. He did the same thing with the three tramps. There was two sets of tramps arrested. I don't know if people know this. The first set of tramps who were Gedney and all those guys, the real bums, they got pulled off the train at 12:35 p.m. The second set of tramps, who we know of, the R tramps, that call didn't go out till 1:56 p.m. Okay, so he ignores that whole second set of evidence to focus on the first set. Like lone gunman people are intentionally, what's the word I'm looking for? Like obtuse.
obfuscating.
Obtuse. That's
Okay.
the word I'm looking for. They're intentionally obtuse and they cherry pick and they use like debate technique to win debates as opposed to data. And they try, they use ad hominem attacks and yeah, like I don't even like those people don't even exist to me anymore. Like I don't even if you're a lone gunman person, you don't know enough to talk to me.
Okay.
So
So when Ferry then is finally out of that seminary and he's back in Cleveland and he's doing the flying thing and he's teaching aviation, and it's around the same time then when you start putting him outside Cleveland, like in Tampa. Now he's identifying with Clay Shaw. So something happened when he shifted almost careers from trying to be a legitimate priest.
right.
Now he's doing stuff that we were kind of losing track of.
Well, it was noted that he was actually an amazing pilot. Like
Right.
Garrison said in the film, he could get in and out of anywhere. That was true. Like, and so he probably caught someone's attention early on up in Cleveland. He, with his flight skills, I don't know where he actually learned to fly or what year he learned to fly, but he was doing flight stuff in 47, allegedly with Clay Shaw. So he obviously knew stuff way before then. That's not CIA. CIA came around in 47, right? So Clay Shaw was connected to all these people. Obviously, he had the connections. See, we got to remember, like the OSS ends in 45, CIA comes about in 47. You have 2 years where allegedly there's no intelligence squirrel. We're going, oh yeah, right. Yeah, that's the most two important 2 years of in history, right? All those guys were down in South America with the Nazis. That's what they were doing for 2 years, creating the Galen organization and creating the 17 intelligence agencies that now dictate our security state, right? That's what they were doing between 45 and 47. So, but it's during these years that he's probably catching the attention of the right people. There was so he was in the Army Reserve. So it's alleged he was not in the Army, but he was in the Army Reserve.
Right.
And one thing I learned a long time ago is that if you're in the Army Reserve, you're a spook. Okay. So reserve is the cover to get you out of whatever you're doing to go do spook work. Oh, I'm in the Army Reserve. I got to go out of town for a week. Right. That's what the reserves are. That's kind of what I determine reserves are, right? Like people like Tulsi Gabbard. I'm sorry, Tulsi Gabbard been in the reserves for 20 years. I don't want to hear it. Okay, she's a spook too. So It's the same thing. So obviously, he caught the attention of somebody that paired him with Clay Shaw and got him doing the spy stuff, which I believe led him to early U-2 test pilot stuff, which resulted in his alleged alopecia, which is most certainly not alopecia. Um, so that's where I think he got into this little niche. But I think that they manipulated him and controlled him. He even said in his own words that there was film of him having sex with two underage black girls, and that was what they were using to manipulate him. And then
Blackmail.
like no women, two black girls.
No, I mean, yeah, right. But blackmail was being kind of
Oh
dangled.
yeah, blackmail. He was blackmailed. Yes, yeah.
That was being
Oh,
dangled
yeah.
over Ferry. But although you say you're pretty convinced though that this is a mastermind, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think people breeze over the Perry Russo party way too quickly. That Perry Russo party where they're talking about triangulation of crossfire, everyone needs to have an alibi, they need to be seen in a public place. Everything that they did, they talked about at this Perry Russo party as per Perry Russo. And then Perry Russo identifies the guy there at the party introduced as Leon Oswald, right? And so, but it's obviously Kerry Thornley. He's a dirty beatnik and he's got stubble on his face and he's got dirty fingernails. And it's the same guy that Perry Russo had met in the 2 or 3 weeks leading up to that date, which also corresponds with when Kerry Thornley got back from Mexico City and then came back to New Orleans because he's gone for those 4 months. When he comes back from Whittier, allegedly he goes through Mexico City and then comes back and he's back in New Orleans September 4th. It's immediately after that that he's seen multiple times with the big bushy beard in David Ferry's apartment. But the day when they have the party, he shaved and he had stubble, 2 or 3 days worth of stubble. Perry Russo called it whiskers. So there's a lot of confusion over that meeting. But once you realize that that's Kerry Thornley, there's your assassination right there. You have David Ferry, all
Who's
the
talk
connected,
and
who's
Ferry
talk.
is the one who's talking about the triangulation crossfire.
Yeah, Ferry's talking about the triangulation of crossfire. He had a stack of like articles that he would carry around with him wrapped in a rubber band, that were all about Kennedy. I mean, he hated this guy. He thought he was a communist, sold us out at the Bay of Pigs, the whole typical story. Um, and so, yeah, and that to me ices the relationship with Kerry Thornley, right? Because Kerry Thornley is not an underling to these guys at all. So Kerry Thornley allegedly gets back February of 1961 to New Orleans. I think it was way before that because I'm pretty convinced he was at Bolton Ford, which means he had to be prepped for the Bolton Ford incident. And so after that, he goes and he works for Kent Courtney, who's a right wing propagandist who is CIA. And he then gets introduced to Martin McAuliffe, who's a professor at LSU. And he's introduced to Martin McAuliffe by Joyce Talley. Joyce Talley, obviously CIA. And then Martin McAuliffe will introduce Kerry Thornley to Guy Bannister in 1961. And allegedly, Martin McAuliffe, Kerry Thornley, and Guy Bannister meet to discuss his book, The Idle Warriors, which is about Oswald in 1961. 61. Like, this is shocking. This is like, oh my God. This is like, why isn't this on the news? I can't believe how important this is. And no one talks about it, right? And so Kerry Thornley then goes and he is the Oswald lookalike who was identified as Oswald at 544 Camp Street. This is one thing I will never capitulate to. You're never going to let your patsy walk around the belly of the beast. Not at 544 Camp Street, not at the book depository, not at any place you want to set that guy up. You're not going to let him wander around and be in on your thing, right? Like the idea that Oswald was ever at the book depository to me is so ridiculous. Like you're going to get all the employees to come out of the front of the building so nobody can see what's happening, so they can see what's happening out front. You're going to funnel assassins in the back door, get them up to the 6th floor. You're going to kill the power to the elevators to make sure nobody can screw up their escape. And simultaneously, you're just going to let Oswald wander around wherever the hell he wants to go. Give me a break. That's the dumbest story I've ever heard in my life. Okay, this thing was planned to the most minute detail, and it's impossible for them to have let Lee Harvey Oswald loose in that building. Period. Especially if he's not in on the assassination, which he wasn't. There's no possibility he could have ever been there. And the same thing applies to 544 Camp Street. You're not going to have him wandering around, understanding the inner mechanisms of your operation if you're going to use the guy to set him up. This is not going to happen. That's why I became, that's when I realized nothing we know about Oswald's story is true, and that Oswald is out doing other things, like checking in at the Atomic Energy Museum,
Yeah,
going to give talks at Antioch College. This is
yeah.
where all this connects because he's not at the book depository. Well, this is in April. This is before that job, but he's not at any job. He's not at any job. These are front jobs. They're funneling him money through these jobs. Then he goes out on unemployment. Then he doesn't have a job for months, doesn't have any money, but nobody knows how he's getting money, right? Like this is a spook operation from start to finish. And it's so obvious,
Yeah,
you know?
you make it a point that you're more interested in the Oswald story than the actual mechanics of the assassination.
Yes. Yes.
And I want to make a point where people, in such a way though, that demolishes the official story of Oswald, that we're kind of running in circles because we're following this official story of Oswald. That's not what you're talking about. You're talking about this whole idea of tradecraft and this and that aspect of the
Yes.
Oswald. Then
Oswald's whole family was naval intelligence. That's the big secret. That's what they're hiding. They're hiding the Oswald was naval intelligence. They're hiding the fact they groomed children to be spies. And they're hiding the fact that the person who we call Lee Harvey Oswald is not the person they arrested on November 22nd. This is what they're hiding. I'm convinced the assassination is secondary to their ways and means. Period.
you're
If they found out, if the citizenry found out they were recruiting the 12-year-olds to go to be spies, there would be an outrage of the likes of which we've never seen in this country. I think it would be like finding out the CIA pulled the trigger on Kennedy. You know, it's the same thing. It's that big of a deal that they're recruiting children, and I think that the world would freak out if they actually came to admit this, and they can't ever admit this, and that's why they hide everything. That's why everything is the way it is. It has nothing to do with the assassination. It has to do with everything else. That's what I'm convinced of.
you're not, and you don't shy from pointing out that there is a child trafficking going on.
To child trafficking, you can link it. It's just in David Ferry's file alone. His connection to the Reverend George Hyde, no connection to the Paynes,
Right.
who turns out George Hyde isn't even a real bishop or whatever. He was a bishop, but he wasn't a real bishop. The organizations he was allegedly in were not real. This is child trafficking. This is what the Civil Air Patrol was for David Ferry. He was flying these kids around, getting, whatever to wherever, right? That's to me the bigger story. Same thing with Jack Ruby. His prostitution ring overlapped with Bobby Baker's prostitution ring in New Orleans. This is massive. This is huge. It all comes back to this is one big club and we're not in it. And they don't want us to know anything. We can't know any of this. And Oswald and his family are at the center of what we were doing during World War II. The whole stuff about his mother and the lies that she told about where she was from 41 to 44. Like, we don't know where she was from 41 to 44, period. And we have to take her word for where she was in 40. Like it's all covert operations. It's all hidden from us. And they will go to any extent to hide that. People are like, oh, it's 60 years. Why are you hiding stuff about the assassination? It doesn't have any relevance. You want to bet? No event in history has any more relevance than to what's going on in the world today than the Kennedy assassination. Period. They'll never let us know any of this stuff. So,
And
and
you've got
I'll never kill myself. Just so you guys know, I don't even have a car to have a car accident.
not like Oswald. Um,
All this stuff connects. Like, so the way I see it, like you have, like, I'll refer to it within the Kennedy assassination as the conspiracy layer. Because it's like I said, it's not the shooters on the ground and it's not the guys who gave the order. It's like in the middle of this like obscure like body of intelligence and government. But I kind of link everything back to the war. I mean, really, when you start looking at all this stuff, it really begins with Bill Donovan in 1941, the Office of the Coordinator of Information, which would go on to become the OSS. The OSS will then disband in 45, right? And so then we talked about 45 to 47. They're recruiting the Galen organization. They're doing all that stuff. 47, you have the birth of the CIA. And what does that really mean? It really means that all those Nazis that they recruited are a huge part of our intelligence apparatus, particularly with Reinhard Galen. And in 56, they'll create the BND, which is the real German intelligence, which was run by Reinhard Galen, right? So, which is wild. But it's these relationships stemming from World War II that lead to the Kennedy assassination. Like the relationships at play here. All of these people, like when you study Kennedy, one thing you'll find virtually every male who's in the story was in the war. And why? Because it was everyone got into war. That's how it was. So everyone's got a military background, and the smartest of the smart are instantly recruited by intelligence. You sign up for the military and you take a test and you score above certain thing and you're going to intelligence. That's how it goes, right? And so all of these people know each other. Like you've seen the connection between I think David Morales and Westbrook, right, in Vietnam. That's wild. Wild, right? So Westbrook was clearly working with intelligence, just a few years before in order to be able to get there. So all of this, the relationships that spawned all stem from intelligence during the war. That's how all these people know each other. That's the relationship. The intelligence community is like the glue that holds everything together.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So,
it's wild.
I want to talk about Ferry on the day. He was in the courthouse, wasn't he?
That's the story, but who do we get that story from? We get that story from a bunch of mobsters and Regis Kennedy. And who was Regis Kennedy?
Well,
He was the
he was an FBI agent,
Yeah,
Corey.
but he was Hoover's point man for the Cubans, and we all know what they were doing right there. One thing I just learned recently that really changes the dynamic for me on the international scale. You always think international stuff is being done by CIA, whatnot, but I recently realized or learned that the FBI was outsourcing their international work to naval intelligence, and naval intelligence was doing international covert ops on behalf of J. Edgar Hoover, which is crazy to me. And that's all I know. And that's going to be a whole nother path of research I need to go down because that would make a lot of sense too, because that would explain Guy Bannister. Because people were like, oh, Guy Bannister, CIA. Maybe not. Maybe not. His background was naval intelligence and FBI. And at
FBI.
the time, FBI naval intelligence were kind of like in a turf battle with CIA over international operations. So I can kind of understand how Guy Bannister could have been FBI and naval intelligence and not really CIA. But all these guys work together. I mean, it really, to a certain degree, like all the guys said that Sturgis wasn't CIA, and they kind of assumed he was Army intelligence, which makes a whole lot more sense, honestly, when you get to know Sturgis a little better. So, but yeah, what it comes down to is, at the end of the day, all these guys know each other, and it all stemmed from the intelligence apparatus.
Yeah. And Sturgis was Haganah for a while too.
Yes, yes, yes. Like it's one big orgy of corruption.
Have you, when you put out there that Ferry you claim was not in the courthouse, were you getting pushback about that? Or was it or what has been the reaction to what you think Ferry was up to on the day of the assassination?
Um, Right. So for me, yeah, I've gotten pushback. Well, I've gotten way more pushback on my Jack Valenti stuff, which is more understandable. That's a much more detailed study than the David Ferry stuff. The David Ferry stuff to me is it becomes pretty obvious. So let's start at day one. The assassination happens. Forget about what's going on in Dallas. We already talked about the most important event in the investigation is the Jack Martin phone call. That leads us to David Ferry and David Ferry's story. So let's dig into David Ferry's story. He says that he was there in New Orleans the day of the assassination. He's at the trial of Carlos Marcello. Then Alice Guidros, who is G. Ray Gill's secretary, says that she sees him about 12:30 in Gill's office, said he was leaving for lunch and he'd be back, never comes back. Then the next appearance we have of him is around 6 p.m. in the evening, where he shows up at the alleged party for Carlos Marcello. And then he will go in to pick up Melvin Coffey and he'll pick up Alvin Bobouf, make a couple phone calls, and then they head on their trip. Well, when you start to read into the story on where he went, he can't seem to remember where he went. Oh, did you go to Vinton first or did you go to Houston first? Oh, I think he even told the FBI the night of the 22nd they stayed in Vinton. They didn't stay at Houston. He said they stayed in Vinton at Marion James Johnson's Roadhouse.
Well,
No, that's not the story.
he's telling that saying that a few years later, and he can't remember the official story that he's supposed to be saying,
Right.
right?
Right. It's exactly it. He can't remember what he's supposed to be saying. So he gets the whole story wrong because he was never on the trip. And then once you put two and two together, that David Ferry is the man seen by Ed Hoffman behind the knoll. Everything from and then you know the whole series of events. Then you got like Velma sees him in the car with the real heavy eyebrows and the
Well,
black suit.
yeah,
You
but
know,
I want people like but let's go back and say so. Never mind that the event of the century just happened and has stricken the American populace into just glued to their television. It makes no difference to these guys who want to go skating. By the way,
correct. Correct.
okay.
And then I mean, they screw up the story so many times, like whether they had guns in the car to go
Good
hunting,
thing. Yeah.
right? Bo Boof told them they did have weapons in the car. Ferry's like they did have weapons, and then I think Melvin Coffey, who wasn't even there, said they didn't have weapons. I mean, it was the whole thing was just it was a big cluster. But so I'm trying to remember what was the thing that because I'll never. There's a lot of times like I'll realize something and like I'll have like a physical reaction, like. It's almost like the walls shake. I'll have like a oh my God kind of moment, you know? And I had that moment for David Ferry when I realized that he was never at the Winterland. Oh yes, it was because I was studying the Winterland. And I'm going over the statements of Roland, Chuck Roland, who's that's not even his real name. And so he's saying that David Ferry is introducing himself like 5 times. Hey, I'm here. I'm David Ferry. I'm like, why would anybody do that? And his description of him, he describes the red wig that he's wearing and toupee, and like nothing about it made any sense. He didn't go skating. He sat by the phone. You know, of course, do we have any phone records from the Winterland? Of course not. They didn't give us any phone records from the Winterland. I realized that wasn't David Ferry, you know, and so eventually I came to realize that it wasn't Melvin Coffey. That was just an alias being used by Leighton Martins. Leighton Martins and Alvin Bobouf were like his two tightest inner circle from that CAP kind of world. And Leighton Martins, I don't understand. Why are you going to be bringing like 16-year-old kids to be breaking into bunkers, which is what they did with Leighton Martins in Homa. They brought him along, and he's like the number two guy in this supposedly serious organization about Cuba, and he's 16 years old. What is going on here? Explain this to me. I don't get it. Right. So, but anyway, once I realized that was just an alias being used, then I find the pictures of them all in Dealey Plaza. And then the whole story fell into place. You realize that the Winterland was an alibi. And the whole story was an alibi story, just like the phone calls from Dave Yaris and Robert Bernard Baker, alibi phone calls, the phone calls from the Alamo Motel to WSHO and WDSU.
Let's mention that. Which is first you point out the what I think now is an obvious obfuscation that they're trying to throw off. It was WDSH, as you know, there is none,
Right.
right? Okay, so you're on this trip and you going to get away after a long trial. You go want to go ice skating, fine. You're at the hotel. Why are you calling media? But to you, why were the calls to WDSU made, Corey?
Those to me connect directly to Kerry Thornley,
Why? How?
because Kerry Thornley was the Oswald lookalike involved in the Tippit shooting. This to me, like here's the thing, and I got to point this out: like you can't study one thing and expect to understand that thing because everything is about context. You got to understand the bigger picture to see where things fall within the context. That's how I connect the Tippit shooting directly to the Perry Russo party incident. Once you realize it's Kerry Thornley and it's not Oswald, and they're talking about triangulation of crossfire, then you've got that relationship there between Kerry Thornley and David Ferry. So boom, it just became obvious. The trail of events that happened from the grassy knoll to behind the book depository to the Tippit shooting to David Ferry fleeing to the house on Belmont where he swaps vehicles to Kerry Thornley fleeing to the Texas Theater. The whole stuff that goes on in the Texas Theater ends up being arrested out the back, ends up in the red Ford Falcon owned by Igor Vaganov with Carl Mather's license plate on it, right? This is all spycraft, tradecraft,
Right.
obfuscation. Once you realize who the players are, the whole story starts to make sense. And then from there, what happens? Kerry Thornley disappears. We don't see him again. But then we have the phone calls from the Alamo Motel to WSHO and WDSU, which I connected to Kerry Thornley because he confesses in his letter to Jim Garrison that he writes that he had personal friends there. Every single thing of importance in the assassination, Kerry Thornley links him to in the 50-page affidavit.
You know,
So
I thought Thornley went on WDSU that weekend, if not that night, to basically sully the character of Oswald.
okay, so let me explain Kerry Thornley's actual timeline because Kerry Thornley, they tried to obfuscate. He tried to obfuscate where he was when he's initially questioned, and he said that he was at work, which was at like that cafe in New Orleans. Here's the problem. He didn't. He was off work on Friday, and he didn't have to be at work until Saturday afternoon. And it was Saturday afternoon he's working when the FBI shows up to talk to him. Okay, so he does not have an alibi all day Friday,
Friday.
and I'm telling you, he wasn't in New Orleans for the days leading up to it. Um, I think most of his cover story about his job stuff there was front job stuff also. Because if he's in Dallas setting up Oswald living at the boarding houses, he ain't working in New Orleans. You see what I'm saying? So there was some obfuscation there. I forget the name of the place he was working. It wasn't the Bourbon House. It was a little cafe thing. But yeah, once I realized that those phone calls to WSHO and WDSU, and those are CIA radio stations, by the way. WDSU, Walter Sheridan's the connection there. WSHO, long story behind WSHO. It was actually owned by Hank Greenspun, who owned the Sun newspaper in Las Vegas. Really interesting backstory to how he acquired that. But
But hang on, Corey. Can you just give me a brief like the nutshell Greenspun
Hank
connection?
Greenspun in the 1940s got in trouble and arrested along, and he was implicated with Jack Ruby in a large scale smuggling operation of smuggling weapons and airplane parts to Israel. He also owned the Sun newspaper, and he had a column that he would write where he was a major political player in America, and he would be able to like shape political decisions based on articles he would write in his newspaper. Really fascinating guy. He ended up at one point employing Jean-Pierre Lafitte, so he's directly connected to the upper echelon of the CIA. Um, but he ended up owning SHO, WSHO, and he ended up acquiring it with the help of Jack Martin and the CIA. So it was a small family. And this, you'll never believe where I found this info. I found this in like radio history archives, not even in like any other place. It was like weird radio history archive. But ultimately, the CIA in the early 60s wanted to buy up a bunch of radio stations, and they did for some reason. And this was one of them. And they went and harassed this guy and his family. And they used Jack Martin to do it as one of the guys. And under the pressure, this guy eventually sold the radio station and it was bought by Hank Greenspun. That's the history of WSHO,
Okay.
which is crazy to me. Crazy to me.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
whole bunch of weird stuff going on with radio stations and private radio stations. Robert McEwen down in Galveston was connected to some radio stations. I found his name on paperwork for some of these radio stations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
KLIF and
yes, yes.
yeah.
There's a lot of weird stuff that goes on that I look at. I'm like, what are they doing?
Okay.
What is happening here? There's something happening, but I don't know what it is, you know?
You found something explosive about the Winterland, which is just fantastic, Corey. Was this where you had one of your kind of physical
Yep.
manifestations?
I'll tell you the whole thing about the Winterland. The most important thing is the relationship and the name Caltagirone. And so this was blew me away because I had been studying Jack Valenti and his sister, and I do a lot. I'm big on family and genealogies, like big time on genealogies. And so at one point in time, I find well, I'm digging into the Winterland and Jack Valenti at two different times, right? But
Yep.
a lot of times when I take a break from the assassination itself, I would take a break and go research a sub-assassination topic, right? And so that's what I did with Jack Valenti. And so it turns out the woman who owned the Winterland, when you dig into this, turns out that Lyndon Johnson owned the Winterland. And it was built and started at the inspiration of a woman named Mary Boots Roberts, who was a professional ice skater. She did like Disney on Ice and Ice Capades, very famous ice skater in the 40s and 50s. So they opened the Winterland. And it turns out that her birth name is Caltagirone. And at some point in time, I connected I had the Winterland Caltagirone over here. And then when I'm looking into Jack Valenti, I find the name Caltagirone as is the name of this children of Jack Valenti's sister. And I'm like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
what is that name? And I go back to my notes and I'm like, oh my God, it's the same name. Caltagirone. I never heard this name before. Turns out that Mary Boots Roberts, the owner of the Winterland, was born Mary Caltagirone, and she has a first cousin named Vincent Caltagirone, who happened to be married to Jack Valenti's sister. And they were married for 10 or 12 years, had two children. This is a big deal. And the FBI covered it up. When you go through Jack Valenti's files, Vincent's name is redacted. The relationship to Lorraine is redacted. Lorraine's name is redacted. Why? Why is this? Beats me. Well, in my further research, I made the determination that the short tramp was not only Vincent Caltagirone Jr., but that also this person was identified as James Earl Ray as being the real Raoul. And this brings us to Martin Luther King. And so how we got the Winterland now connected to Martin Luther King assassination. And why was I know that Jack Valenti was the shooter up there. And now we have Vincent Caltagirone as the short tramp, and he's connected to the Winterland.
You have
So I'm
Jack Valenti. You have Jack Valenti as a shooter where?
on the null.
And who is Jack Valenti on November 22nd, 1963?
He is really a nobody. He is really a nobody. He's actually a somebody, but he appears to be a nobody. So Jack Valenti was really just an advertising guy in Houston. That's the story. The story, he's just an advertising executive in Houston, runs Weekly in Valenti, which is an ad firm that handled Kennedy's
Yeah.
election in 60, all Lyndon Johnson
Because
stuff.
everything's on the up and up, Corey. Everything is, there's nothing to see here. Everything is innocent. And, he's just an ad guy. He's just a PR.
So the funny thing is, like, Jack Valenti ended up telling people that he was going to be moving to Washington 2 weeks before the assassination. But the assassination happens, and eventually he gets caught up in a whirlwind that he didn't anticipate, ends up being the number two guy, right? He becomes Lyndon Johnson's gatekeeper instantly. The split second the assassination happens, Johnson and then everybody ends up over at Parkland. Jack Valenti ends up in the basement of Parkland, where I'm convinced he planted the magic bullet, or the original magic bullet anyway. But from the time that they're all at Parkland, Cliff Carter grabs Jack Valenti and says, "The president needs you." And Johnson then tells him, basically, "You're with me. We're going to Washington." They get on Air Force One. And from that moment until early 1966, if you wanted a conversation with Lyndon Johnson, you went through Jack Valenti. That's how it was.
And you see Valenti in the Sarah Hughes LBJ taking the oath, by the way.
Yes,
Valenti's in
looking,
there.
he's
Very
looking like
intense.
very intense. So I'm convinced he was Johnson's handler because Johnson never won an election. He was an Israeli puppet the whole time. Every election he was ever won, it was stolen. He was a plant,
Okay, people
and
might be.
so
I don't want people to skip over what you're saying here. I mean, that is. There's a lot there that if people actually looked into the Johnson story, they could. It's there's a Jewish line in his lineage, and you think every election, not even to the 48 one that got him into the Senate, was rigged in his
yeah,
favor.
all of them, yeah, 100%. And I think because he came from a very rich family, most people didn't realize this, but he was the richest president we ever had at the time. He was worth $300 million when he got elected, or not elected when he made it into the White House. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
He was worth 300 million. The Johnson family enterprise owned half of Houston. I mean, they built the Winterland. They owned the Winterland. That was used as David Ferry's alibi. They were
And speaking of radio station, television station, they had their own media network as well. I think it's worth saying. I mean, they controlled that station. I think that,
oh yeah,
you
oh
know,
yeah, 100%.
anyway.
But they were major players, and so I don't really understand the relationship between Johnson and the CIA. It must have been pre-existing. Um, but the
But do you
the
think could Valenti handle a weapon?
oh yes, oh yeah. So here's the thing. I know somebody, Ryan Dawson. Ryan Dawson has a ton of stuff on Valenti that he won't share, like aliases, covert operations he's involved in, associates, all kinds of stuff. I can't find it. I can't find the stash of Valenti stuff that is really the mother lode of implication for
But
him.
he's on the research chat. He doesn't.
No, he doesn't participate. So, but the reality is, like, Jack Valenti, when you go back into his history, he got into the loop at the age of 15, went to work for Humble Oil. I mean, he got connected to Prescott Bush, George DeMorn Shield, George Bush, all as a teenager. And so I think he was just groomed all around. I think from the time he was that young. And why would they groom him? Well, his father, Joseph Valenti, is not who history books have said. According to the history books, his father was just like an Italian. Well, his father was born in America, and then worked for the tax collector office in Houston. At some point in time, he'll do some little embezzlement, and he'll go to jail for a couple of years. But that's supposed to be his only, criminal history. When I pulled his criminal history from the FBI, it's like 3 pages long. Involves multiple counts of treason, false, faking American citizenship, like all kinds of stuff, right? So his dad was a hardcore mobster connected to some people before the days of the big mobster, before the big mobster days. You know what I mean? Um, so his dad was involved with all kinds of stuff. And if his dad was investigated for faking his American citizenship, he's obviously an immigrant, came from out of the country. But he lied about being an American, born in America. It says he was born in America in 1892. Not possible. So his dad is a big major question mark. Um, Obviously, his dad got him involved in this stuff or this world. His mother was a DeGeorge, from the DeGeorge family. The DeGeorge family was Houston mob before the Houston mob became defunct. After the Appalachia meeting up in New York, where the mob got busted in the
In
50s,
57. Yeah.
the Houston mob fell apart at that time. Joe Savilla was up there, and he was the Houston mob guy, and that whole thing crumbled after. He got a spanking after that. So, yeah, the Texas mob situation is interesting because it was kind of they tried to have a local mob, but really it was like everybody could get a piece of it, you know.
Right. Chicago, New Orleans. Yeah.
Yeah. Lenny Patrick, that's how I linked Lenny Patrick to the assassination because he was running the books in Dallas. But when you look up the big bookmaker in Dallas, you're going to find a guy named Isidore Max Miller. But Isidore Max Miller and his brother, David Leon Miller, were allegedly renting a place from Bertha Cheek for a couple days leading up to the assassination. But those guys were in Dallas. Those guys were not in Dallas. Those guys were in Atlanta the whole time. So that's how I linked Dave Yaris and Lenny Patrick to the assassination, and then the broader picture of where they were and what the FBI was doing surrounding those guys. But yeah, those guys were definitely in Dallas using those names. And that brings us back to the Georgia license plate that drove through the parking lot seen by Lee Barrows. Lee
Was it,
Bowers.
but it was an out of state license plate,
It
right?
was it was Atlanta, Georgia. It was a Georgia license plate,
I
which
didn't know.
complete because it's in the note. That's in the FBI notes. It was a Georgia license plate, and so the Georgia license plate. Where's Georgia in this? That's where David Leon Miller was. That's where probably Dave Yaris drove to get a car, then drove to Dallas. There's no proof, but this is how cops put together cases. You know,
Is this
this
the
is how cops
same?
put. Go ahead.
Are you so before the like 10 minutes before the assassination, there's a car that's going around the parking lot behind the knoll.
Right, you have an Impala with mud up to the windows, which I'm convinced was Emilio Santana, and then you have this car, which had a Georgia license plate on it, and then there was one other vehicle I forget. But yeah, this one with the Georgia license plate. The only connection to Georgia we have is um, David Leon Miller. Well, we have a Kerry Thornley connection afterwards, but before the
Well,
assassination, David Leon Miller had moved from Dallas to Atlanta, and so he was questioned, and he's like, "No, I've been in Georgia this whole time." So he was not in Dallas, but somebody was in Dallas using his name, staying at Bertha Cheek's place.
okay.
Okay, so the way I see it, these guys were probably connected to Yaris. Yaris probably drove up to Atlanta, borrowed a car, did the assassination. I put Dave Yaris as the shooter between the pergola and the fence that was edited out of the Knicks film. That bullet that got dug out of the ground by the alleged FBI agent,
Yeah.
I believe that shot, I believe, came from between the pergola and the fence, fired by Dave Yaris. And then I believe he's captured in one of the films in the railroad yards after that. So, but the Dave Yaris stuff, he disappears off the radar from the FBI about 3 or 4 days before the assassination. Same thing with Lenny Patrick. They're following all these mob guys. They lose track of both of these guys, and then both of them reappear in Chicago a week after the assassination.
Hmm.
So Dave Yaris was on the road during the assassination. So, and then when I link him to the David Leon Miller stuff, to me, that kind of fell into place. So, but that's like some of the hardest stuff. That's like red belt level connections here that most people aren't going to make.
Well,
Um,
a couple things I'll mention. Well, Motir was from Georgia, and George Augustine Hyde, our bishop that Ferry
right,
put in
right,
his will, also was from there. But I was questioning about Georgia also because I thought there was a one of the vehicles in that driving around had like Goldwater bumper sticker,
right,
so it made me
right,
wonder like Arizona. And of course he has to say out of state. You can't just say what the state was, can you?
right,
You know.
right.
Um, but in Yaris too, I want to mention who, as you know, huge mob guy out of Miami, obviously from Chicago, but um, he ran a linen supply industry in Miami called Clean Towel, with the same name as that truck that I mentioned at the beginning of the show at Elman, Houston.
That's interesting.
Clean
I didn't know
Towel,
that. That's interesting.
possible getaway.
Well, yeah, well, that would also connect back to the Honest Joe stuff because so Honest Joe owned a pawn shop and he had a car that he had like all this stuff on. He had like a gun bolted to the front of the car and he had like knickknacks all over this car. When you see it, you're gonna be like, oh my God. I'm convinced that he was dropping shooters off in that vehicle because when you see where the vehicle was right before the assassination happened, Honest Joe's vehicle is seen right out in front of the book depository. You know what I mean? And so he's seen in weird places all around. And then he's connected right back to Chicago Mob and Yaris and all these people like we're talking about. So yeah, look into the Honest Joe stuff. That'll blow
Yeah.
your mind too.
How do you know, or what makes you think that Yaris was edited out? Like, how would you know?
Oh, because the Knicks film was clearly edited. When you look at the Knicks film, where I put Yaris is between the pergola and the fence. And the original Knicks film, you don't see that area. It was edited. But then eventually we got the unedited version, which shows the pergola and the fence. And to me, it looks like there's some weird stuff going on. Like in the Zapruder film, it looks like there's people who are frozen in time. I don't know what kind of photographic manipulation technique they did, but as the vehicle is traveling down Elm, you see the guy in the apron talking to the big black guy. They never look at the president's car.
Right.
Never. They keep looking that way. Why?
Those
It's like they're,
those people along the road too are just
yeah,
seem really strangely like
yes,
mannequins almost.
they're not looking at the president's car as it goes by, which you would think everybody be looking at. It's the same thing in the Knicks film. It looks like the back of a guy running out from that area, but he's frozen in time. I don't know how to interpret it. All I know is I'm pretty convinced that that was Dave Yaris fired the shot from there that hit the ground, and then he's captured in the film in the railroad yards immediately afterwards. And Dave Yaris, when you get into Dave Yaris, he was responsible for the assassination of Anton Cermak. At 19 years old, he organized the assassination of Anton Cermak in Miami.
Yeah.
And Cermak is another very important one because everyone history books say it was an attempt on Roosevelt. It wasn't. It was an assassination of Cermak because Cermak had it out with the Chicago mob in Chicago. Like Frank Nitti was running the show, and he had it out. He partnered with a guy named Roger Tuohy, who was Frank Nitti's, opposing gang, the other gang in Chicago, and he chose the wrong side. And so Frank Nitti, through Dave Yaris and Zangara and all those guys, they were responsible for that assassination. That to me is one of the very first precursor assassinations that led to that Huey Long and then Kennedy,
So Ed Hoffman, who is this deaf mute, did you always what did you think of his before you kind of maybe put two and two together about who that was that he's describing? Did you believe Hoffman? Did you have any questions about him? And where is he actually? And how far away is he that he can see this? Is
Well,
he
he's on the Stemmons Freeway, on the far side of the Stemmons Freeway. So he's a good little bit. I mean, I guess a couple hundred yards. It's not
that's
like right
pretty
next
far though,
door.
man.
Yeah, but it was enough for him to see something. You know what I mean? And so, yes, I do 100% believe what he said because everything he says corresponds with the photographic record and the statements made by Velma, and that links to the description of the Great Plymouth, which will directly connect to the Tippit shooting. So, see, this is how evidence leaves a trail. And so, when you've got five witnesses who all describe the same man wearing a black hat, felt hat with a wide band with a blue suit.
The
You
only suit he owned.
right, the only suit he owned. You got three people at the Tippit shooting with that description, giving that description, and you got two people at Dealey Plaza giving that description. It's like duh. Like this is the thing. Like I don't understand how people couldn't connect those dots. This is police work 101. Like I said before, if a guy robs a bank in a red car and you get another robbery and it's a red car, it's all probably the same guy. It's really that simple. But people in Kennedy like to overcomplicate this, like it's some freaking, you know, mystery wrapped in an enigma, right? Like they say.
Yeah.
Like I hate that line from that movie because that's what they want you to think.
And it's fairy too, it says it
Yes.
in the
They
movie.
want they want you to think that it's impossible to solve. No. No, no, no. Honestly, knowing what I know now, if I could have gone back and focused on just the documents I know that led to my conclusions, you could knock this thing out in like 3 months.
Yeah.
Seriously. It took me years. But like
Yeah.
knowing what I know now and knowing all the things that I did wrong in the original investigation, it's like there's no way any competent law enforcement officer could investigate this case and not come to the conclusions I've come to. That's all I can say about it.
So you put fairy shooting, tossing the weapon to Blackman
Blackman.
and
Yep.
Hoffman seeing this,
Yep.
uh, who and then Blackman kind of discreetly, he's out of the picture.
Yep.
And I've always said, I've talked about this with buddies and everything. It's like, where are these guys? Because there's supposedly all these shooters around. Where are they? Because there's nobody fleeing. There's nobody conspicuously sticking out. And you make the argument that it's just kind of like he fixes his hat and he
Yep.
blends in, right?
Yep. Like if you want to, like, I mean, seriously, you could probably, if you just pretend like you belong, like you could pull off some major stuff. Like, I just recently watched a bunch of clips from that Catch Me If You Can movie where the guy made the fake checks. Bro, that guy bluffed his way everywhere. You just pretend like that's the key. That's the secret. I'm supposed to be here, you know? Just casually walk away. No one's going to suspect. They're going to expect someone to be running, right? So don't run. I pretty much knew that. I pretty much considered that fact that they knew they couldn't get out of there. They knew there was no escape, right? They had to shoot and blend in instantly, and they had to all be pulled off in a split second, you know?
Yeah. What I love is that you show, and you argue this to be very convincing. The angle is also very similar. What you do, you put the two of them together. Ferry, a previous photo where he's got that hat on and he's got the suit but what I love is you have a photo of Dealey Plaza. I don't know who took the photo, but you say that this is Ferry and he's talking to a woman. Right there on the in the plaza. I mean, literally,
Yeah,
you can see the pergola and all that,
yeah.
and we don't know who that is, of course.
See, I don't know if they're actually talking, but she's standing there
Right.
facing him, and it's
Right.
like I can't imagine what else is happening.
Well, what I love though is that Fairy being Fairy, who can probably compartmentalize and give off that veneer of normalcy, having done just what he did. He's got that. It's almost like his altar boy obedience from like the Midwest comes out, and she's probably asking some question, well, and he's answered probably her. Maybe he's
Oh
giving her
yeah,
direction. He's
yeah,
that nuts that he can just kind of give a normal answer and continue on. And you say he gets into the is it the Plymouth next to the depository, Corey?
yeah. So according, we have a phone call from Velma who calls the coast to
How did
coast.
you find this 2006 coast to coast call from this woman who gives these incredible descriptions?
Yeah, so that's actually been around for a long time, and there have been like articles written about that phone call and stuff. But no one ever really was able to kind of collate what she said in there. And a big part of the reason is because she identifies a man who comes out of the back of the building with a high-powered rifle. So there's about 4 or 5 people who see that person come out of the back of the building. All 4 or 5 people give different descriptions of that same person. Okay. But this, again, goes back to I have experience on the road collecting witness statements, realizing what people, they never get the height and weight right. Never. Never. No one knows what dark complected means to, compared to fair complected. Like, if people just don't know these things, trying to describe how somebody looks is virtually impossible for most people. It's very hard. So you get all kinds of crazy descriptions. So I think most people disregarded what she said in that call because when you look at the statements of the other witnesses, they describe different things. One person says he was not wearing a hat. One person says he was wearing a hat. Some people say he had nothing in his hands when he came out. Some people say he had something in his hands when he came out. All the witnesses, though, are absolutely sure it was this person it came out of the building at 12:33. It was 3 minutes after. So obvious it's the same person. So that just shows the fallibility of witness statements, right? So I think that's why she gets overlooked a lot. But the kicker in that whole thing is he had a suit with a felt hat and he had real heavy eyebrows. Okay. Now, why does he have real heavy eyebrows? Because he paints them on, right? To me, that was the dead giveaway. That was like the nail in the coffin. And then when you realize there's a gray Plymouth parked at the Tippett shooting, and there's 2 people at the Tippett shooting, and the guy's described as wearing a black felt hat, and he's got a blue jacket on that ended just above his hands. It's like that is the same guy. It's like, oh my God. And then you realize the string of events, and then you find the Belmont address where Kenneth Glenn Wilson got arrested at.
Okay, so where do you put Ferry after Dealey Plaza then?
Yeah, I put him going directly to the Tippett shooting. Just like Velma said, he met with Tippett on the other side of the Daltex building for whatever reason. Then from there, they head over. Tippett goes one way. He goes to meet whoever was getting off the bus at the Gloco station. No one ever gets off the bus. I think that
Right.
was part of the plan. Him panicking was part of the plan. They needed him to end up at the where he got shot. And they knew that the person getting off the bus he was told to meet, arrest, or shoot or whatever, they knew was no one was getting off of that bus. And so that was, I believe, what sparked his panic to go to the top 10 record store and then finally end up over where he gets shot. That whole thing, I think they knew. They knew what was going to happen. They knew he would end up where they probably said, if something goes wrong, come to this address. That's probably what they said. If something goes wrong, just meet us here. And that's what he did. He met them at the 10th and Patton. That's when the person who was driven from the boarding house gets out and shoots him. So, but yeah, I put Ferry there because Ferry, this description by Akela Clemens is the kicker, and which debunks the statements of Helen Markham. Helen Markham said he was walking down the street reloading his revolver. No, no, no. Kerry Thornley used a semi-automatic. We know that because of the kind of imprints that were left on the shells. Even if there's some shenanigan with the shells, right? Whether they have a signature on them or not, the ones that are presented to us, three of them are from a semi-automatic, one is from a revolver. That's all I know. So he didn't have a revolver. So Helen Markham's stories are garbage out the window, and completely contradicted by Akela Clemens, who puts him, David Ferry, reloading the revolver while he's standing over the body. So you clearly have two people. Then you have Doris Holland confirms the statements by Akela Clemens that said the one guy was on the other side of the street, and she's like, he waved to him just to go. He waved his hand at him to go. Two people now are witnessing two people shooting at Tippett. So yeah, that's how I ended the descriptions. He wasn't he was a heavy guy, but he wasn't a very big man. That's David Ferry. Okay. He's about 5'10", 210 pounds, something like that. Perfect description. Right. And then I find the picture of him taken before with the stupid hat on, and I'm like, this is easy. And that was like when I lost faith in all Kennedy researchers. 60 fucking years and I'm the one that's got to figure this out. Give me a break. What could I have been doing with my life? I'm broke because I'm a historian and we don't make any money. I could have gone down a real career. You know, why couldn't someone else have figured this out so I didn't have to? It pisses me off sometimes, really. Like when I think of how much money I've lost in the last decade choosing this path, it's stunning. Hundreds of thousands of dollars out the window because I choose to do this. Because I don't really care about the money at the end of the day, But Jesus Christ, man, 60 years and this is the kind of quality research we've gotten. Give me a break. That's just when I really, me and the research community got like this because they just continued to reject my work when it's obviously what happened. It's not even that I don't even feel like I've done anything special. Like that's what happened. The evidence says it. Somebody else should have put this together. I'm not claiming credit or anything. I'm just like, I'm pissed off that I'm the one that had to do this. This isn't the career path I wanted to take. So now I'm
No,
shoehorned into it.
nobody to your knowledge has put Ferry there.
The only other person who solved this thing, just like I did, is Ryan Dawson, but he refuses to talk about it. Ryan Dawson solved this thing a decade before I did, and he has never, ever talked about it except in personal conversations with me. And I don't know why. He chose to be a political commentator as opposed to being a historian. He likes to talk about new stuff. I could care less about new stuff. But Ryan Dawson figured out a lot of it. He got a lot wrong. He doesn't understand any of the Oswald duplicate stuff at all. He denies all that. But when it came to the shooters and it came to where people were and like the bulk of what really happened, he nailed everything. He got it all right. We've had conversations openly discussing this. He just doesn't talk about it ever. He knows things that I'll never. He figured out where Clay Shaw was. He put Clay Shaw in Dallas with a guy named Erwin Heyman, who works for the Jewish Agency in Switzerland. Me and my guys have been trying to figure that out for 2 years. We can't crack it.
So another alibi. Shaw was not on the West Coast.
No, Shaw was in Dallas.
Wow.
Also, they had a party that night to celebrate at Jack Ruby's synagogue, and allegedly Clay Shaw was there.
A party?
I threw a party at Jack Ruby's synagogue that night. When you dig through all the documents surrounding Jack Ruby's rabbi and witness statements around what Jack did that night, it becomes really obvious they threw a party at the synagogue.
It was a late one. It was
Yes.
9:30 at night.
Yes.
It's kind of late for a memorial if you
Yes.
go to a synagogue or church. By the way,
Right.
that Silverman came over to LA to right those same spots that we were talking about. Gruber's temple, that's where he goes.
You see, that's this. I'm telling you, we have many levels of underworld in this country. And this Jack Ruby synagogue underworld is a real thing. These synagogue, like I'm convinced that I'm convinced there were people in Dealey Plaza in wearing elaborate costumes and rabbis in ceremonial robes, and that they were celebrating a symbolic Purim festival, the salvation of the Jewish people by killing the evil Haman. I'm convinced that this relationship and the knowledge of this assassination came down through the system of rabbis. That's where I'm convinced that happened. Because these people who showed up in the costumes are not direct conspirators. They were just told about it, and then they showed up.
Tell me about where you see this happening, Corey.
The Robert Hughes film, the unedited frame of the Robert Hughes film. The Robert Hughes film is nothing but obfuscation the whole time, especially when you get to the Dealey Plaza shot where it shows Houston Street.
Yeah.
Tippett is standing on Houston Street, and that frame is completely botched. But these people like to leave a calling card, and what they did was they left one frame unedited that I found, and I actually found it at the I forget one of the Kennedy picture websites. But it's an unedited frame from the Robert Hughes film. It's in full color, and it clearly shows three rabbis standing on Houston Street wearing ceremonial robes to commemorate the Jewish holiday of Purim. Purim is a holiday where it's basically the book of Esther. And the book of Esther, if you read the book of Esther, it's the story of Purim. And it's how Haman, the evil Achaemenid Persian Empire official, was going to kill all the Jews. And the Jews got together, Esther and Mordecai, and they prayed to God. And then all the Jews in the land fasted, and God heeded their calls. And Haman ended up getting hanged by the king. And it's ultimately the story of how the evil king gets killed, and it's the salvation of the Jewish people. The evil person of the empire is killed, and it's how the Jews got saved. That's the Kennedy assassination to them. Because Kennedy was going to shut down. He was going to end Israel as a country. He was going to end their nuclear program. He was going to end them. Period. He was a rabid anti-Semite. I mean, the guy he hated Jews. Period. And he was going to shut them down, and they knew it. And so the killing of Kennedy is symbolically akin to the Book of Esther, the salvation of the Jewish people through the killing of the evil, Achaemenid Persian Empire official Haman. Right? It's the same thing. It's purely analogous. And this isn't the only time they've done this. These costume people show up at all these assassinations because they know about it in advance. And Ryan Dawson is the one who kind of introduced me to this and showed me a whole bunch of stuff. They were at the assassination of Anton Cermak in 33, 20 years before the Kennedy, 30 years before the Kennedy
30 years.
assassination.
Yeah.
This Jewish occultic underworld is what's destroying our country and this world. And nobody wants to talk about it because they don't understand how the occult could actually fit into people's decision making that governs a country. Holy shit. Let me tell you, that's exactly what runs this country. These people are sickos, and they control the money flow of our country, and they control our government. And I mean, once Israel killed Kennedy, they took over our country on November 22nd, 63. Period. We're an Israeli colony. That's why every president, no matter who it is, bends over backwards for these people. It's all blackmail and bribery and all this stuff. This is where Jeffrey Epstein comes into it. Like the world makes a lot of sense to me. I just don't like it. You know what I mean? So the
There's
world we live in is a very disgusting place.
And then there's the ultimate damning document that you argue is the most important document, and that puts Ferry
Yeah.
where
The
he
Frank
really was after the murders. And
Yep. The Frank Chilona document is by far the most important document I've ever seen. I can't imagine anything being more important because that document debunks Ferry's alibi story and it leads directly to the grassy knoll. So I don't see how there can be another document as important. The Kerry Thornley affidavit to me is the other most important one. Then you start to get into like then it jumps right to the early Oswald life contradiction stuff.
yeah, but just so I understand, because while Ferry is supposedly hanging out in a dorm room, which not out of the realm of possibility. I mean
No, no.
that's
I
something
believe
he
he
would
did.
do.
Yeah, I believe he did do
And
that.
Chilona describes this man sleeping on this bed almost to the point of where this dude was so tired that he was sleeping with his hat on, right?
Yes. Yes, fully clothed. And he noticed that his hair was weird. He noticed. And then Thomas Compton tells him that he painted or he pasted his hair on the hat where the hat met the head. Like, this is why establishing your cast of characters is paramount. You have to know who is in the story to know who that is, right? Once you understand the general cast of characters, you got a husky Latino with a pockmarked face. Who is it? Lawrence Howard. You got this guy with the bad hair. Who is it? With the big eyebrows. It's David Ferry, right? It's obvious. Certain things become obvious once you understand who is who, you know?
So Arcacha was covering for Ferry, took the boys was it from Dallas in your mind
Yes,
to
had to have been.
Houston?
Yep, had to have been. And notice he went to Dallas with Emilio Santana, but he didn't leave with Emilio Santana. What happened to Emilio Santana? I think he got arrested in Dealey Plaza. Plain and simple. I think he's captured in Willis 10 photo, getting arrested, all in black, right in front of the book depository. And that will lead back to why the lunchroom second floor with the Coke story is all BS. You know, you read that in the book. You write the whole thing. You understand why the Coke story is
Yeah,
garbage, right?
yeah.
So
So Marion Baker running into the book depository wasn't in your mind because he heard. Is it because he heard shots coming from there?
that's what he says, but I don't think that's possible. When you realize where Marion Baker was when the shots were fired, he wasn't even a block from Dealey Plaza yet. So he
He
couldn't have heard
flew
anything.
over. He flew over though. I mean, he was flying, man.
What I think happened was he saw the shooter at the Daltex. I think he saw the man with the rifle run north on Houston Street. And I'll tell you why. Because when much later, much later, a call goes out over the radio. Attention all cars. The suspect at the shooting of the president is a seen in the area of Elman, Houston, is a white male about 30 with black hair carrying a, and they name a certain rifle. Okay. That's definitely not Oswald. Clearly not Oswald. And what I gathered from that is that Marion Baker saw this guy get off the ledge from under the fire escape, run north on Houston Street. He gets off the motorcycle and runs. Did they have portable radios then? No, they didn't. So at some point while he's chasing this guy, somebody calls into dispatch and gives the description, which is an exact description of Emilio Santana. 30s, black hair, medium height, as a rifle. That's who I put at the Daltex. That matches the description there. So a lot of people confuse this with the Tippit shooting because that announcement didn't come out till the Tippit shooting happens. And so people like to say that people, because I got caught on this line, I accidentally went down this line for a while thinking the guy at the Tippit shooting had black hair. No, 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 that was totally wrong. So that all happens in a period of like 1230 to 1236 or 1237 or something like that. And we know that Baker never entered that book depository until at least 1236 or 1237 because of the statements of Robert McNeil and the phone call he made to New York from the book depository, timestamped at 1236. He leaves. He says there were no cops in the building when he left.
Wow.
But according to Baker and Truly, when they get back downstairs, it's flooded with cops. So what does that tell you? Robert McNeil was out of the building before before they even went in that building. And that couldn't have happened until 1236, which means that, and then this connects directly with the Green Nash Rambler that flees, right? So the way I see it, Oswald doesn't work at the book depository. William Seymour works there as the Harvey Oswald. He leaves. He's captured in the Robert Hughes film at 12:33 p.m. in the railroad yards. He then re-enters the book depository. He takes the elevator back up to the sixth floor because the power is now back onto the building, turned back on by William Shelley. And then he does something on the sixth floor. I don't know what, but then he starts to make his way down the stairs. At around 12:38, he is then stopped by Baker and Truly between the third and fourth floors on the stairwell. He's wearing a light brown jacket like he's captured it in the Robert Hughes film. Roy Truly identifies this man as an employee and lets him go. And that right there was when I realized Oswald never stepped foot in that goddamn building. He identified William Seymour as an employee. Curry, in his letter about Baker's memo, says that this is Lee Harvey Oswald on the stairs that they stopped. There's no way Oswald worked there. None. Zero. It was another front job, just like all his other front jobs, while he's out doing whatever the hell he's doing that nobody else seems to know about. That also brings us back to the Lincoln Mercury dealer where he does the test drive, tells the guy he works at the book depository. And then people at the book depository, I forget who it was, but somebody else there saw him driving, leaving the book depository. And Oswald never had a car or drove anything, ever. So all this to me leads right back to William Seymour. And then what happens at 1240, we have the guy who looks like Oswald, seen by Roger Craig, wearing the light brown garment. He says it's a shirt. Baker says it was a jacket. Comes down the side of the grass, gets in the Green Nash Rambler. The Green Nash Rambler then heads to Oak Cliff, where then you have the Penningtons, who put them seeing Lee Harvey Oswald at the Tidy Lady Laundry, where he makes a phone call in Mexican, where he's wearing a brown jacket and he showed up in a light green station wagon. It all connects. This is police work 101. Okay. This is like, this is so obvious to me.
Is that what they said? He was speaking Mexican?
Yes, they said he got on the phone and he spoke in Mexican. So obviously, what did he do? So obviously, the Green Nash Rambler leaves Dealey Plaza. They go to a safe house somewhere. Everyone gets dropped off. William Seymour continues to drive the car to the Tidy Lady Laundry, where he will leave it in the parking lot. Why does he leave it in the parking lot? Well, the next time we see this pair of the husky Latino with a pockmarked face and Oswald will be Robert Vinson in his book Flight from Dallas, where he talks about he was on a flight, he was on an Air Force flight, and they had to turn around because the president got shot. And they fly in and they landed on a dirt field next to an aqueduct in Dallas. And they pick up two guys wearing overalls, and one of the guys was a big husky Latin, and the other guy looked like Oswald. Duh. How many times have we seen this before? Too many times. It's clearly William Seymour and Lawrence Howard after they left the book depository in the Green Nash Rambler. After William Seymour goes to the Tidy Lady Laundry, they will then end up next to the aqueduct, which means they left the Green Nash Rambler in the parking lot of the Tidy Lady Laundry. And why? Because Lauren Hall needed to get back to Los Angeles. So Lauren Hall probably took Howard's Green Nash Rambler and drove it back to LA. Nice and neat. All vehicles are accounted for, and they're out of Dallas with their lives again. They're done with their identity transfer operations in the setup of Oswald, and now they have to worry about dealing with the cover up for the next I don't know how many years. So that's the series of events that I see happening.
And will you have Ferry changing license plates at some point, right?
Yeah, because I think David Ferry owns a light blue Mercury Comet station wagon, but when he is seen in multiple places, it's a light blue Ford Falcon. Well, it's because the light blue Ford Falcon and the light blue Mercury Comet are identical vehicles, both made by Ford with different branding. So we have the Mercury Comet is what he's driving, but he's checked in at a couple different places in a light blue Ford Falcon. The light blue Ford Falcon station wagon is seen at the Belmont address up after the Tippit shooting. That was kind of 2 + 2 = 4 for me. And then um, this is tradecraft. This is tradecraft. Now, where could they possibly have gotten the other Ford Falcon when he owns a Mercury Comet? Well, James Llewellyn just happened to run that car rental place. So you're doing some license plate swaps on rental vehicles. Makes sense to me. That connects another dot, fills in a gap with James Llewellyn, makes you realize why they dug into him so deep. He's probably one who rented them the cars that they drove up to Dallas in, right? So I don't know, man. Like, have you ever done a jigsaw puzzle before? When you do a jigsaw puzzle and you got all them pieces together, is there any possibility that it's wrong? I don't think so. It only fits together one way. And my overall thesis of everything that happened, there's only one or two little things that don't fit. Only one or two. And I'll give you an example. The photograph of Lawrence Howard in Dealey Plaza where he stopped, but they let him go because he didn't speak English. We have that picture. I can't fit that picture into any timeline at all. Period. But we got the picture. So how does that happen? No idea. There's a couple little weird things like that, but for the most part, everything in my book fits together very fluidly, like one big jigsaw puzzle. So,
So just so I understand, Ferry then is hanging out at this dorm room in Hammond, Louisiana, and he has to leave to go to Galveston and check into a hotel. He has to do that,
right.
or motel.
I don't
That's
know that he had to. He probably didn't have to because he wasn't there in Houston when they checked in the Alamo Motel. I wonder why he did that. He probably had to meet up with them for another reason that we don't know of.
okay,
But he then checked into the motel to provide alibi before driving back up to Hammond, where he arrives about 5:30 in the morning Sunday. And that's when Thomas Compton gives a bullshit story about he was crying about, oh, my things, they were at my house and they're taking my things. No, no, no. That won't happen until the next day.
right.
So Thomas Compton's statement about David Ferry is all wrong. He says he didn't know David Ferry. He doesn't know how David Ferry found him. But Frank Chalona says, yeah, Thomas Compton told me that a friend would be staying in the room. So Thomas Compton's a compromised liar, you know? And this all connects to me back to the Civil Air Patrol and his hypnotism and mind control for these kids, and that's how Bo Boof and Martins and all these kids got into this story,
Yeah.
which is weird, really sick.
Yeah. Yeah. And Shalona puts Ferry leaving the dorm then on Monday, right? They have the funeral going on like in the lounge or something, right?
Right. Well, and the official story is that he stayed there Sunday night. And the official story, he stayed there Sunday night, and he
Oh,
left there Monday.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the official
Okay.
story is like he was doing his trip. He comes back to New Orleans. He realized the cops were looking for him, so he goes to Hammond.
Right.
That's his story. So
Right.
we can say with certainty he was there Sunday night because he was definitely there Sunday. So basically, he's up there the whole weekend, with the exception of the drive down to Galveston to check into the hotel.
Yeah.
You know what I
Wow.
mean?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and from there, this is the best part. Like that phone call from Jack Martin
Right.
resulted in David Ferry being in Jim Garrison's office on Monday morning. That's how close they came to solving this thing like that. They had the shooter in his office on Monday morning. I mean, I don't even know what else to say about it. That's amazing.
Did Martin, where do you think the motive was coming for Martin to do that phone call?
Because he hated David Ferry with a passion. Martin was not into the pedophile clique thing at all. And he knew David Ferry was a pedophile, and he despised him for that. And so he was probably all drunk one night and made that call. He probably made the call when he was drunk and angry. He shouldn't have made that call. If he didn't make that call, you and I probably wouldn't be sitting here today.
Yeah. Yeah. And he ends up in the hospital too that weekend with getting pistol whipped by Bannister, right?
Yeah, but there's more to that story also. This I need to, I'll tell you up front, I need to go back and revisit that. But the story we were told in JFK movie is not
Yeah.
accurate.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken, Delphine Roberts was also there and he whipped her too. Both of them got whipped. Um, and I don't think it's because Jack Martin was going through the files. It had something to do with something else. I only very briefly covered this like when I first started my research, so I definitely need to go back and revisit it. But yeah, there's more to that story of getting pistol whipped than we know about. And there is some documentation covering that story. So yeah, that is definitely is something that needs to be looked into further.
Okay.
The
Okay.
reason for the pistol whipping had to do with the assassination, I'm sure, but I don't think it's because Jack was going through the files. So,
Okay. Great. And Corey, just from a context of law enforcement, when you see how this event just defined these guys' lives, I mean, if you look at Ferry's final 3 years, I mean, they're just pathetic.
they're
And
pathetic, dude. Some people got taken care of. Like Jack Valenti got promoted to the best freaking, highest levels of society. And David Ferry, who did the same thing Jack Valenti did, he got nothing. He got nothing. He had to basically, he blackmailed Carlos Marcello to give him 50 grand and he opened that stupid service station, you know? Like, he did everything he did. Like you got to read through thoroughly the stuff from Reverend Broshears has what he says about Ferry because he's like Ferry was always broke, he was always busy, he was always miserable, and he's like he was being forced to work for these people for very little money. He's like if Ferry had money, I never saw it because he never had any, So
well, per Pink, what he says, Bro Shears is just fabulous, and he just makes stuff up, and we're not to trust Bro Shears.
Broshears, it was most certainly okay. You don't move to New Orleans and hang out only with CIA related guys if you're not with the CIA. You don't move out to San Francisco and become the face of the gay rights movement 30 years before there's a gay rights movement. You know what I mean? Like, um, he was an agitator. Of course, he was. Okay, in 1960 something, if you're into gay rights, you're a CIA agitator. Period. No one's out there pushing gay rights in the 60s and meant it because you get your ass kicked. Like, period. So all that stuff was agitation. CIA is the goal of the CIA, who are controlled by Zionists, is to undermine American culture. I don't know if you noticed what's going on in the last decade or so, but that's their point. The whole push for gay rights and even civil rights was about undermining American culture. It had nothing to do with giving civil rights to people. And so that was the intent. And that's the same thing with Broshears. Like he was propped up as part of this Purple Panther thing, you know, and that was a CIA operation. I'm sorry, like I'll never believe that was organic. None of these movements are organic. Sorry, these are all culturally undermining operations by the government, which is fucking crazy.
Real quick, so Valenti, though, how does he get out of Dealey Plaza
Um,
in your
so
mind?
in my opinion, McIntyre photo number two is the proof that David Ferry, Jack Valenti, and David Morales hitched a ride on the Secret Service car to Parkland Hospital.
Under the tunnel, under the triple underpass, or at the tunnel area,
Um,
kind of.
so you're only supposed to have nine guys on the Secret Service car, and in the photographs, there's nine guys, but two of them are obscured, and it's clear as day by the visual evidence alone. The two people on the side of the Secret Service car in McIntyre photo number two are Jack Valenti and David Morales. How they got there, I don't know, but that's who it is. And so Jack Valenti will then end up at Parkland Hospital, where he will end up in the basement where he plants the magic bullet. And then he will end up on Air Force One. And then he will fly to Washington, D.C. with the new president.
And when he gets out of there and he's running the MPAA, you make a interesting point that he's not even in California.
Nope.
He's
He's
still
in
out.
D.C.
He's out of
That guy
DC.
never left D.C.
And when you were on William Ramsey's show a while ago, he made a great point. He's like, yeah, all these award shows, they would always bring Valenti out as, at the beginning, and everyone would be clapping for the MPAA guy, you
I
know.
think him first off, him getting into the White House and then the MPAA was his reward. He changed the face of the world and handed the keys to the kingdom over to Israel, and they gave him back Hollywood as his reward. No doubts. I have no doubts that he was involved in other covert stuff over the years. Like, I want to see a list of people who got assassinated around the world and compare that to Valenti's travel schedule. I want to see that because there's a conversation between him and Kissinger about China in 73. I can't understand what they're talking about. They're obviously talking in some kind of covert code or something because the conversation is about bringing celebrities to Peking. But it makes about as much sense as Obama and Podesta with the emails talking about pizza. It was like the same kind of thing. It didn't make sense what they're talking about. So I'm convinced Jack Valenti, I'm convinced was an assassin. I'm pretty confident he shot Martin Luther King too. I can't prove that. I'll probably never be able to prove that. But his former brother-in-law was goddamn Raoul. I mean, give me a break. So the reason that these like Lenny Patrick and Dave Yaris, they were partners for life because when you're a shooter and you got a spotter you trust, you stick with them forever. You know they got your back, right? Jack Valenti being the shooter, Vincent Calderon Jr. being his spotter, his former brother-in-law, makes perfect sense to me. And the connection to Martin Luther King, bro, come on. I don't think that he shot Kennedy and that was the last person he ever shot for the rest of his life. I think he continued to use his head of the MPAA status as the ultimate cover. Because who's going to believe it? Nobody. Nobody's going to believe the head of the MPAA is going around killing people. Just like Chuck Barris. Remember Chuck Barris, who did the head of the Gong Show? He said that he was a CIA assassin.
Right.
I believe that guy because this is how these people operate. That's why they use a lot of these like this ice skating companies, like Ice Capades and Disney on Ice. They use as smuggling operations, just like Larry Crawford was involved with the Carnival circuit. That's smuggling operations. Everything that has a up and up face can be used on the back end for covert purposes. Who's going to think the Ice Capades are smuggling drugs? Nobody in a million years, right? So that's why they would do it. So I'm convinced of this how the underworld, which includes the CIA, operates.
Yeah. The up and up is what really irks me, that we continue to push this up and up stuff as being what it is,
Yeah,
and as just surface. I mean, as reality, as up and up, and how nice this is, and how great this is, and it just when you get down to it, it's worse than that. And Corey, Itzhak Rabin, why do you think he was in Dallas?
yeah, because it's in his wife's memoirs. She wrote about it in her book. She says that they were in Dallas that day. He had flown in the night before, and they ended up taking separate flights back to Israel. She got in before him. When she gets back to Israel, she finds out Kennedy got killed in Dallas, and she couldn't believe that just hours ago both of them were there. So yeah, Yitzhak Rabin was in Dallas. The head of tech. Okay, so here's the deal. They might have on paper. So on paper, the head of the Mossad was, well, what was his name?
Is it Shamir or
No, it was. If I heard it, I'd know it.
not
Um,
Bennigan?
no, it was another guy that no one
Yeah.
ever talks about. But he was on paper the head of the Mossad. But I think that's just on paper. They got you on paper. The Israelis they don't tell the truth about anything. I think they're allergic to the truth. And so they'll put somebody's name on paper as being the head of the Mossad when the reality was the head of Israeli intelligence was Rabin at the time. I mean, that's the reality. And then you have Shamir and Begin in Los Angeles really forming those relationships going back to 46, right? So you got like almost 15 years of relationships here in LA between the Israelis and the Jews who ran the mob out there. So, and he was confirmed to have been in Los Angeles 3 weeks before the assassination, right? I'm telling you, everybody was in Dallas. This was some sort of ritual. They all had to be there and they all had to witness it. Like I'm telling you, like there's pictures of Joe Anitas in Dealey Plaza, Ted Shackley. It was, if you believe that Ted Shackley's Larry Floor, which I'm kind of on the fence about, but it's a possibility. But they were all there. You got David Morales on the Secret Service car. Like everyone had to be there. I mean, I'm even convinced Angleton was there, but that I'll never be able to prove. I just think it was they had to be there. Whether to see for themselves or what, I don't know. But Dealey Plaza, I'm convinced, was a closed scene. They were controlling who could come in and come out. The vast majority of people we see in the photos of Dealey Plaza, we've never identified. There's people holding cameras we've never identified. In the Alton's photo, there's a lady wearing a black dress holding a camera up to her face like this. No one ever seen that film. No one's even ever talked about that woman in black with a camera. There's like so much going on that we're told to look over here.
Yeah,
Oswald, 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 when the whole story is over here.
yeah. Just a couple questions left, Corey. Did you ever connect with Mary Haverstick?
No, I need to. I need to read her book because she just put out that June Cobb was QJ Win, and like this is I'm gonna have to figure out why she come to that conclusion because the evidence is so overwhelming that it was two people and that it was in fact based out of Madrid and Marseille, and then Albarelli closed the door on that one and identified Scorzani and Lafitte as being the heads of those offices, which honestly I had concluded that also because it was obvious. So I don't know where she's getting that information. I don't know what she's using to justify her conclusion. Now, could June Cobb have been involved with these operations? 100%.
Yeah,
But unless there was a third QJ win, I don't know. But see, I
yeah,
used to think that the QJ win was a smokescreen because it was a QJ win was supposed to be an assassin recruiter. I thought that was the cover story and that QJ Win was the actual assassin. I was very wrong. I was very wrong about that. Once I realized that it actually was a recruitment operation and that it was linked to those two places, who it was became obvious. But for me, when you start digging into like Valenti and you start digging into Jean-Pierre Lafitte, you'll find a document connected to ZR Rifle where I'm sure it's Lafitte and he's using an alias down um, in No Name Key.
yeah.
But an assassin who was introduced by Trafficante came down there and met with him, and then he's writing back to CIA, and he's writing back. He used the name Pierre. I used the name Pierre with him, but I believe he knows my true name, or something along those lines. I am 100% convinced that that is a meeting of Valenti and Jean-Pierre Lafitte at No Name Key. And the reason for that is because when you dig into Valenti, deep, deep into Valenti, you'll find other aliases. The alias Pierre was connected to Valenti in some of his dealings, or speculative, I should say, because you can't prove it, right? But when you look at the evidence, it looks pretty clear to me that there were a slew of aliases connected to Valenti, and Pierre was one of them. And then that would pop up in the document. Also, the alias of Max. The alias of Max pops up as being one of the assassins who came to No Name Key. And then Scorzani had acknowledged that the shooter on the knoll went by Max and Zed. So
Right.
that to me, and Trafficante introduced Max to Sturgis. And there's a Jewish assassin named Max who you can read articles about. Not that Max. I think they tried to put it off on that guy, but yeah. So a lot of the stuff becomes like third layer speculation, right? And I'll admit it up front. But when things walk like a duck and quack like a duck, they kind of, it's usually a duck. And when things are obvious, they usually are pretty obvious. So,
You dismiss the CIA mafia plots against Castro as
oh
being
yeah,
over?
oh yeah,
Really?
100%. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm telling you, so we knocked out Iraq in a day, but we couldn't take out one dictator on a dinky island 90 miles off our coast. Yeah, give me a break. Give me a break. It paid for them to have the communist threat 90 miles off our coast. The ever-present threat, which generated infinite money for them for the whole Cold War. It was to their benefit to have a communist off our coast. Give me a break. The whole story of trying to knock off Castro is so elementary. Like exploding cigars. This is them laughing at us, dude. It's insulting. It makes me angry. Give me a break.
And
Plus,
then,
like,
yeah, go ahead.
I don't see how Cuba couldn't have been involved in the smuggling operations. I mean, we were smuggling weapons and people to Europe and Israel and all these places. Like, I don't see how Cuba couldn't have been involved with that. I just don't. I mean, so yeah, I think the whole thing is all smokescreen.
And I think my last question then is going back to these raids that Ferry and others were doing. What makes you say that these raids were actually to arm Israel and that that to fight Castro was really just a screen?
Yeah, because well, this all goes back to Sonborn post World War II. The Israelis, well, the pre-Israeli Zionists is what I call them. Ben Gurion particularly. They come to America and they're like, "Hey, we want your World War II surplus so we can fucking fight the Palestinians." And we're like, "No, pound sand." And so what they do? They launch Sonborn. They break into all our bunkers, steal all our weapons and all that stuff, right? And so then Gordon Novell, when he's interviewed about the home burglary, was that stuff was supposed to go to the anti-Castro Cubans. Those weapons were supposed to go to Cuba, right? He straight up tells Jim Garrison that those weapons went to Interarmco, and Interarmco was a CIA weapons company out of Virginia, which was run by Samuel Cummings. And Samuel Cummings is the guy who ran Adams Consolidated, who imported the Carcano rifle.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Okay.
mean, it's all one big circle. I mean, the most distant parts of this assassination, when you understand the real relationships behind the scenes, are not that distant. They're all it's this is the Truman Show, and what we're living through is a scripted event, a series of scripted events. The whole Kennedy assassination story, as we've been told, and even the conspiracy, what I call the official conspiracy theory. This is all yeah, this is all just a scripted story that we've been given to cover the real history.
I do. I want to ask about this global Centro Mondiale Commerciale
Yeah,
complex. It's hard. Yeah, your conclusions on it.
yeah. This is all the stuff that led to Gladio. Um, The CMC Permandex is the proof that the mafia, the CIA, and a whole bunch of other scumbag organizations all work together. They never did any known business. All they did was funnel money around and buy stocks. Well, CMC bought stocks, and when you dig into CMC, the only stocks that they bought into, I mean, they bought 30% of companies. I mean, they bought into big shares of companies. All the companies were directly connected to producing materials for the Dimona nuclear reactor, whether it was nickel companies or like you know, weird metal companies or, all kinds of stuff. Aero Manufacturing, right, which was run by Lawrence Meyer, who was connected to Jack Ruby, got caught up involved in the smuggling of nuclear parts to Israel. That's what this is all about. Like the underlying themes, like it's layered. You got the CIA stuff, you got the Mossad stuff, you got the right wingers in California, and it doesn't even the why doesn't even matter on the shooter level or even the David Ferry level or even the CIA level. Because ultimately, the green light was given by Ben Gurion because everyone's a Zionist and he was the king Zionist. And so he was the one they would all defer to. And so and it wasn't even that he gave the order. I bet it was brought to him and he greenlit it. He said, sure, let's do it. And then you have the Battle of Letters, May 63, which Kennedy threatened Ben Gurion. We don't know what he said, but somehow, in some way, he threatened Ben Gurion to the point where Ben Gurion stepped down. Levi Eshkol comes in, and then you have the definitive letter saying, hey, let us into Dimona or we're going to shut you down. He said it very politically correct. He said, it might seriously jeopardize the relationship, but that means, hey, fuck off if you don't get us in there, right? And so um, they said no. They said pound. Eshkol told Kennedy to pound sand. Who the hell are you to tell Kennedy to pound sand? Right? Who the hell are you to build nuclear reactors in violation of the Nuclear Deproliferation Treaty and then lie about it? That's Kennedy was going to kill Israel as a country. That was why he got killed. That's what it comes back to. And the evidence for that is underlying all the way back to the end of World War II. You know? But that's what I tell people. You can't study the Kennedy assassination and expect to understand the Kennedy assassination. For me, the assassination study begins in 1896.
Theodore Herzl.
Herzl. If it doesn't start with Herzl, you're not studying Kennedy. Like that's all it comes down to. Like you got 50 years of study, 60 years of study before you get to Kennedy, And that's why I'm glad I started with World War II. World War II led me to the doorsteps of Kennedy because the people like Tibor Rosenbaum, people like George Mandel, who formed Permindex, like their story began in World War II. Hell, you can even look at Angleton and Dulles and all those guys who their story begins before World War II, you know?
So, do you think someone like a Lewis Bloomfield was as nefarious as somebody like a Garrison was thinking,
Yep.
or a Torbett?
I don't know what the deal with that Torbett document is. Whoever wrote that stupid Torbett document, that Torbett document is half correct and half
Right.
blatant propaganda, which tells me it's an intentional propaganda document because that's how you spread propaganda. You always include some truth with your propaganda. So the guy who wrote that knew a whole lot of stuff that he shouldn't have known, but at
Yeah.
the same time, he put out a whole lot of garbage because that Torbett document, like I tell people, do not even bother wasting your time. Don't touch it. I'm like, pretend it doesn't exist. It's going to fuck with your head and don't even waste your time on it. So I don't understand that document, the purpose of it, who wrote it, how they got the information, because they know things they shouldn't know. So they knew something.
Yeah.
That's the big, to me, that Torbett document is one of the biggest mysteries in Kennedy. So,
Yeah. Corey, leave you here, man. Can you stay on
uh,
for a second when I stop?
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate your having me on. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.